Good. Oh, come here. Come here. Good boys. Good boy. Oh.
Unaware what she was doing, in Perrin's opinion. How do we go about finding Rand? He asked, but she did not appear to hear him. Moraine? Remain close to the inn, she said after a moment. Tyr can be a dangerous city for those who do not know its ways. The pattern can be torn here. That last was soft, as if to herself. In a stronger voice she said, Lan, let us see what we can discover without attracting attention. The rest of you, stay close to the inn. Stay close to the inn, Zareen mimicked as the Aes Sedai and the warder disappeared down the stairs. But she said it quietly enough that they would not hear. This Rand, he is the one you called the... If she looked like a falcon right then, it was a very uneasy falcon. And we are in Tyr, where the heart of the stone holds... And the prophecies say, the light burned me. Tafirun? Is this a story I want to be in? It is not a story, Zareen. For a moment, Perrin felt almost as hopeless as the innkeeper had sounded. The wheel weaves us into the pattern. You chose to tangle your thread with ours. It's too late to untangle it now. Light, she growled. Now you sound like her. He left her there with Loyal and went to put his things in his room. It had a low bed, comfortable but small, as city people seemed to think befitted a servant, a washstand, a stool, and a few pegs on the cracked plaster wall. And when he came out, they were both gone. The ring of hammer on anvil called to him. So much in Tyr looked odd that it was a relief to walk into the smithy. The ground floor was all one large room with no back wall except for two long doors that stood open on a yard for shoeing horses and oxen, complete with an ox sling. Hammers stood in their stands, tongs of various kinds and sizes hung on the exposed joists of walls, buttresses and hoof knives and other farrier's tools lay neatly arranged on wooden benches, with chisels and beak irons and swages, and all the implements of the blacksmith's craft. Bins held lengths of iron and steel in various thicknesses. 5 grinding wheels of different roughness stood about the hard dirt floor, 6 anvils, and 3 stone-sided forges with their bellows, though only one held glowing coals. Quenching barrels stood ready to hand. The smith was plying his hammer on yellow-hot iron gripped in heavy tongs. He wore baggy breeches and had pale blue eyes, but the long leather vest over his bare chest and apron were not much different from those Perrin and Master Luhan had worn back in Emond's Field, and his thick arms and shoulders spoke of years working metal. His dark hair had almost the same amount of gray that Perrin remembered in Master Luhan's. More vests and aprons hung on the wall as if the man had apprentices, but they were not in evidence now. The forge fire smelled like home. The hot iron smelled like home. The smith turned to thrust the piece he was working back into the coals, and Perrin stepped over to work the bellows for him. The man glanced at him, but said nothing. Perrin pulled the bellows handle up and down with slow, steady, even strokes, keeping the coals at the right heat. The smith went back to working the hot iron on the rounded horn of the anvil this time. Perrin thought he might be making a barrel scrape. The hammer rang with sharp, quick blows. The man spoke without looking up from his work. Apprentice, was all he said. Yes, Perrin replied just as simply. The smith worked on for a time. It was a barrel scrape, for cleaning the insides of wooden barrels. Now and again he eyed Perrin consideringly. Setting his hammer down just for a moment, the smith picked up a short length of thick, square stock and pushed it into Perrin's hand, then picked up his hammer again and resumed work. See what you can do with that, he said. Without even thinking about it, Perrin stepped over to an anvil on the other side of the forge and tapped the stock against its edge. It made a nice ring. The steel had not been left long enough in the slow furnace to pick up a great deal of carbon from the coal. He pushed it into the hot coals for almost its entire length, tasted the 2 water barrels to see which had been salted. The third was olive oil. then took off his coat and shirt and chose a leather vest that would fit his chest. Most of these tyrant fellows were not as large as he, but he found one that would do. Finding an apron was easier. When he turned around, he saw the smith, still with his head down over his work, nodding and smiling to himself. But just because he knew his way around a smithy did not mean he had any skill at smithing. That was yet to be shown. When he came back to the anvil with 2 hammers, a set of long-handled flat tongs, and a sharp-topped hardy, the steel bar had heated to a dark red, except for a small bit of which he had left out of the coals. He worked the bellows, watching the color of the metal lighten, until it reached a yellow just short of white. Then he pulled it out with the tongs, laid it on the anvil, and picked up the heavier of the 2 hammers. About 10 pounds, he estimated, and with a longer handle than most people who did not know metalworking thought was necessary. He held it near the end. Hot metal gave off sparks, sometimes, and he had seen the scars in the hands of the smith from up at Round Hill, a careless fellow. He
Hey,
did not
OG,
want to make
how you
anything
doing?
elaborate or fancy. Simple things seemed
Hope you're
best for the
doing
moment.
well.
He began by rounding the edges of the bar, then hammered the
Dogs
middle
are
out into a broad blade, almost as thick as the original at the butt, but a good hand and a half long. From time to time, he returned the metal to the coals.
this
to
one
keep it
here
pale
is
yellow,
Snoopy,
and after a time, he shifted to the lighter hammer.
and the other one
half the
over
way to the
here is
first. The piece beyond the blade he
Tuffy.
thinned down, then bent it over the anvil horn in a curve down beside the blade. A wooden handle could be fitted onto that eventually. Setting the sharp chisel hardy into the anvil's hardy hole, he laid the glowing metal atop it. One sharp blow of the hammer cut off the tool he had made, or almost made. It would be a chamfer knife for smoothing and leveling the tops of barrel staves after they were hopped together, among other things, when he was done. The other man's barrel scrape had made him think of it. As soon as he had made the hot cut, he tossed the glowing metal into the salted quenching barrel. Unsalted gave a harder quench for the hardest
Oh
barrel,
shit.
while the oil
That's
gave the
crazy,
softest
OG.
for good knives. And swords, he had heard, but
We
he had
need
never had
some
any part in making anything like that.
rain over here for
When the
at least
metal had
for
cooled
us.
enough to a dull gray, he removed it from the water and took it to the grinding wheels. A little slow work with the foot pedals ground a polish onto the blade. Carefully, he heated the blade portion again. This time the colors deepened to straw to bronze. When the bronze color began to run up the blade in waves, he set it aside to cool. The final edge could be sharpened then. Quenching again would destroy the tempering he had just done. A very neat bit of work, the smith said. No wasted motion. Are you looking for work? My apprentices just walked away, all 3 of them, the worthless fools. And I've plenty you could do. Baron shook his head. I do not know how long I will be in Tyr. I'd like to work a little longer if you do not mind. It has been a long time and I miss it. Maybe I could do some of the work your apprentices would have done. The smith snorted loudly. You're a deal better than any of those louts, moping around and staring, muttering about their nightmares, as if everyone doesn't have nightmares sometimes. Yes, you can work here as long as you want. Light have orders for a dozen draw knives and 3 cooper's adzes, and a carpenter down the street needs a mortise hammer, and too much to list it. Start with the draw knives, and we will see how far we get before night. Perrin lost himself in the work, for a time forgetting everything but the heat of the metal, the ring of his hammer, and the smell of the forge. But there came a time when he looked up and found the smith, Dermid Ajala, he had said his name was, taking off his vest, and the shoeing yard dark. All the light came from the forge and a pair of lamps, and Zareen was sitting on an anvil by one of the cold forges watching him. So you really are a blacksmith, she said. He is that, mistress, Ajala said. Apprentice, he says, but the work he did today amounts to his master's piece as far as I am concerned. Fine stroking, and better than steady. Baron shifted his feet at compliments, and the smith grinned at him. Zareen stared at both of them with a lack of comprehension. Baron went to replace the vest and apron on their peg, but once he had them off, he was suddenly conscious of Zareen's eyes on his back. It was as if she were touching him. For a moment, the herbal scent of her seemed overwhelming. He quickly pulled his shirt over his head and stuffed it raggedly into his breeches and jerked on his coat. When he turned around, Zareen wore one of those small, secretive smiles that had always made him nervous. "Is this what you mean to do, then?" she asked. "Did you come all this way to be a blacksmith again?" Ajala paused in the act of pulling the yard doors closed and listened. Perrin picked up the heavy hammer he had used, a 10-pound head, a handle as long as his forearm. It felt good in his hands. It felt right. The smith had glanced at his eyes once and never even blinked. It was the work that was important, the skill with metal, not the color of a man's eyes. "No," he said sadly. "One day, I hope, but not yet." He shouted to hang the hammer back on the wall. "Take it." Ajala cleared his throat. "I do not usually give away good hammers, but the work you have done today is worth more than the price of that hammer by far, and maybe it will help you to that one day. Man, if I've ever seen anyone made to hold a smith's hammer, it is you. So take it. Keep it." Perrin closed his hand around the haft. It did feel right. "Thank you," he said. "I cannot say what this means to me." "Just remember the one day, man. Just you remember it." As they left, Zareen looked up at him and said, "Do you have any idea how strange men are, blacksmith?" "No, I did not think you did." She darted ahead, leaving him holding the hammer in one hand and scratching his head with the other. No one in the common room looked at him twice, a golden-eyed man carrying a smith's hammer. He went up to his room, remembering for once to light a tallow candle. His quiver and the axe hung from the same peg on the plaster wall. He hefted the axe in one hand, the hammer in the other. By weight of metal, the axe, with its half-moon blade and thick spear, was a good 5 or 6 pounds lighter than the hammer, but it felt 10 times heavier. Replacing the axe in the loop on his belt, he set the hammer on the floor beneath the peg, handle against the wall. The axe haft and hammer haft almost touched. 2 pieces of wood equally thick. 2 pieces of metal, near enough the same weight. For a long time he sat on the stool staring at them. He was still staring when Lan put his head into the room. "Come, blacksmith. We have things to talk over." "I am a blacksmith," Perrin said, and the warder frowned at him. "Don't go winter crazy on me now, blacksmith. If you cannot carry your weight any longer, you may drag us all down the mountain." "I'll carry my weight," Perrin growled. "I will do what has to be done. What do you want?" "You, blacksmith. Don't you listen? Come on, farm boy." That name that Zareen so often called him pulled him to his feet angrily now, but Lan was already turning away. Perrin hurried into the hall, followed him toward the front of the inn, meaning to tell the warder he had had enough of this blacksmith and farm boy. His name was Perrin Barra. The warder had ducked into the inn's only private dining room, overlooking the street. Perrin followed him. "Now listen, warder, You listen, Perrin," Moraine said. "Be quiet and listen." Her face was smooth, but her eyes looked as grim as her voice sounded. Perrin had not realized anyone was in the room except for himself and the warder, standing with one arm up on the mantel of the unlit fireplace. Moraine sat at the table in the middle of the floor, a simple piece of black oak. None of the other chairs with their high, carved backs were occupied. Zareen was leaning against the wall at the other end of the room from Lan, scowling, and Loyal had chosen to sit on the floor since none of the chairs really fit him. "I'm glad you decided to join us, farm boy," Zareen said sarcastically. "Moraine would not say anything until you came. She just looks at us as if she was deciding which of us is going to die. Be quiet," Moraine told her sharply. "One of the Forsaken is in Tyr. The High Lord Saman is Balal." Perrin shivered. Loyal squeezed his eyes shut and groaned. "I could have remained in the steading. I would probably have been very happy, married, whoever my mother chose. She is a fine woman, my mother, and she would not give me to a bad wife." His ears seemed to have hidden themselves completely in his shaggy hair. "You can go back to steading Shangtai," Moraine said. "Leave now if you wish. I will not stop you." Loyal opened one eye. "I can go?" "If you wish," she said. "Oh, He opened the other eye and scratched his cheek with blunt fingers the size of sausages.
I suppose, if I have a choice, that I will stay with all of you. I have taken a great many notes, but not nearly enough to complete my book. And I would not like to leave Perrin and Rand.
Moraine cut him off in a cold voice. Good, Loyal. I am glad that you are staying. I will be glad to use any knowledge you have, but until this is done, I have no time to listen to your complaints. I suppose, Zareen said in an unsteady voice, that there is no chance of me leaving. She looked at Moraine and shivered. I thought not. Blacksmith, if I live through this, I will make you pay. Perrin stared at her. Me? The fool woman thinks it's my fault? Did I ask her to come? He opened his mouth, saw the look in Moraine's eyes, and closed it again quickly. After a moment, he said, Is he after Rand? To stop him or kill him? I think not, she said quietly. Her voice was like cold steel. I fear he means to let Rand enter the heart of the stone and take Kalendor. Then take it away from him. I fear he means to kill the Dragon Reborn with the very weapon that is meant to herald him. Do we run again? Zareen said. Like Ilion. I never thought to run, but I never thought to find the Forsaken when I took the Hunter's Oath. This time, Moraine said, we do not run. We dare not run. Worlds and time rest on Rand, on the Dragon Reborn. This time we fight. Perrin took a chair uneasily. Moraine, you are saying a lot of things right out that you told us we must not even think about. You do have this room warded against listening, don't you? When she shook her head, he gripped the edge of the table enough to make the dark oak creak. I do not speak of a murder. No one knows the strength of the Forsaken, except that Ishamael and Lanfear were the strongest. But the weakest of them could sense any warding I might set from a mile or more away, and rip all of us to shreds in seconds, possibly without stirring from where he stood. You're saying he can tie you in knots? Perrin muttered. Light. What are we supposed to do? How can we do anything? Even the Forsaken cannot stand up to balefire, she said. He wondered if that was what she had used on the Darkhounds. It still made him uneasy, what he had seen, and what she had said then. I have learned things in the last year, Perrin. I am more dangerous than when I came to Emond's Field. If I can come close enough to Bilal, I can destroy him. But if he sees me first, I can destroy us all, long before I have a chance. She turned her attention to Loyal. What can you tell me of Bilal? Perrin blinked in confusion. Why are you asking him? Zareen burst out. First you tell the blacksmith you mean us to fight one of the Forsaken, who can kill us all before we can even think. And now you ask Loyal about him? Loyal murmured urgently that name she used. Are you? But she did not even slow. I thought I said I knew everything. Light, at least I am smart enough not to say I will fight someone unless I know everything I can of him. You... She trailed off under Moraine's stare, muttering. Ogier, the Aes Sedai said coolly, have long memories, girl. It has been well over 100 generations since the breaking for humans, but less than 30 for Ogier. We still learn things from their stories that we did not know. Now tell me, Loyal, what do you know of Bilal? And briefly for once, I want your long memory, not your long wind. Loyal cleared his throat, a sound much like firewood tumbling down a chute. Bilal. His ears flickered out of his hair like hummingbird wings, then snapped down again. I do not know what can be in the stories about him you do not already know. He is not much mentioned, except in the raising of the Hall of the Servants just before Luz Theron Kinslayer and the 100 companions sealed him up with the Dark One. Jalamda, son of Arid, son of Koniam, wrote that he was called the Envious, that he forsook the light because he envied Luz Theron, and that he envied Ishamael and Lanfear too. In A Study of the War of the Shadow, Moylin, daughter of Hamada, daughter of Juandam,
called Bilal the Netweaver, but I do not know why. She mentioned him playing a game of stones with the Theron and winning, and that he always boasted of it.
He glanced at Moraine and rumbled.
I am trying to be brief. I do not know anything important about him. Several writers say Bilal and Samael were both leaders in the fight against the Dark One before they forsook the light, and both were masters of the sword. That is truly all I know. He may be mentioned in other books, other stories, but I have not read them. Bilal is just not spoken of very often. I am sorry I could not tell you anything useful.
Perhaps you have, Moraine told him. I did not know of the name, the Netweaver, or that he envied the dragon as well as his companions in the shadow. That strengthens my belief that he wants Kalendar. That must be the reason he has chosen to make himself a High Lord of Tyr. The Netweaver. A name for a schemer, a patient and cunning planner. You have done well, Loyal. For a moment, the Ogier's wide mouth curved up in a pleased smile, but then it curved down again. I will not pretend I am not afraid, Zareen said suddenly. Only a fool would not be afraid of the Forsaken. But I swore I would be one of you, and I will. That is all I wanted to say. Perrin shook his head. She must be crazy. I could wish I were not one of this party. I could wish I were back home working Master Luhan's forge. Aloud he said, if he is inside the stone, if he is waiting there for Rand, we must go inside to reach him. How do we do that? Everyone keeps saying no one enters the stone without the permission of the High Lords, and looking at it, I don't see any way but through the gates. You do not go in, Lan said. Moraine and I will be the only ones to enter. The more who go, the harder it will be. Whatever way in I find, I cannot believe it will be easy even for only two. Guy Dean, Moraine began in a firm voice, but the warder cut her off with one just as firm. We go together, Moraine. I will not stand aside this time. After a moment, she nodded. Perrin thought he saw Lan relax. The rest of you had better get some sleep, the warder went on. I have to be out studying the stone. He paused. There is a thing that your news drove out of my head, Moraine. A small thing, and I cannot see what it might mean. There are Aiel in Tyr.
Aiel?
Loyal exclaimed.
Impossible. The entire city would be in a panic if one Aiel came through the gates.
I did not say they were walking the streets, Ogier. The rooftops and chimneys of the city make as good hiding as the waste. I saw no less than 3, though apparently no one else in Tyr has seen any of them. And if I saw 3, you can be sure there are many times that I did not see. It means nothing to me, Moraine said slowly. Perrin, why are you frowning in that way? He had not known that he was frowning. I was thinking about that Aiel man. He said that when the stone falls, the Aiel will leave the threefold land. That's the waste, isn't it? He said it was a prophecy. I have read every word of the prophecies of the dragon, Moraine said softly. In every translation, and there is no mention of the Aiel. We stagger blindly while Bilal weaves his nets, and the wheel weaves the pattern around us. But are the Aiel the wheels weaving, or Bilal's? Lan, you must find me the way into the stone quickly. Us. Find us a way in quickly. As you command, Aes Sedai, he said, but his tone was more warm than formal. He vanished through the door. Moraine frowned at the table, eyes clouded in thought. Zareen came over to look down at Perrin, her head tilted to one side. And what are you going to do, blacksmith? It seems they mean us to wait and watch while they go adventuring. Not that I will complain. He doubted that last. First, he told her, I'm going to have something to eat. And then I'm going to think about a hammer. And try to puzzle out how I feel about you, Falcon.
Chapter 51. Bait for the Net. From the corner of her eye, Nynaeve thought she glimpsed a tall man with reddish hair and a swirling brown cloak well down the sunlit street, but as she turned to peer from under the wide brim of the blue straw hat Aylwin had given her, an ox-drawn wagon was already lumbering between them. When it lurched on, the man was nowhere to be seen. She was almost certain that had been a wooden flute case on his back, and his clothes were certainly not Tyron. It couldn't be Rand. Just because I keep dreaming about him does not mean he is going to come all the way from Almouth Plain. One of the barefoot men hurrying past, with the sickle-shaped tails of a dozen large fish sticking up from the basket on his back, suddenly tripped, catapulting silver-scaled fish over his head as he fell. He landed on hands and knees in the mud, staring at the fish that had come out of his basket. Every one of the long, sleek shapes stood upright, stuck nose down in the mud, forming a neat circle. Even a few passers-by gaped at that. Slowly the man got to his feet, apparently unaware of the mud on him. Unslinging his basket, he began gathering the fish back into it, shaking his head and muttering to himself. Nynaeve blinked, but her business was with this cow-faced brigand facing her in the doorway of his shop with bloody cuts of meat hanging from hooks behind him. She gave her braid a tug and fixed the fellow with her eye. "Very well," she said sharply. "I will take it. But if this is what you charge for so poor a cut, you'll not have more business from me." He shrugged placidly as he took her coins, then wrapped the fatty mutton roast in a cloth she produced from the basket on her arm. She glared at him as she put the wrapped meat into the basket, but that did not affect him. She whirled to stalk away, and nearly fell. She was still not used to these clogs. They kept sticking in the mud, and she could not see how the folk who wore them managed. She hoped the sunshine dried the ground soon, but she had a feeling that the mud was more or less permanent in the mole. Stepping gingerly, she started back toward Aylwin's house, muttering under her breath. The prices were outrageous for everything, the quality inevitably poor, and almost no one seemed to care, not the people buying or those selling. It was a relief to pass a woman shouting at a shopkeeper, waving a bruised reddish-yellow fruit. Nynaeve did not know what. They had a good many fruits and vegetables she had never heard of here, in each hand, and calling for everyone to see what refuse the man sold. But the shopkeeper only stared at her wearily, not even bothering to argue back. There was some excuse for the prices, she knew. Elaine had explained all about the grain being eaten by rats in the granaries, because no one in Kyrian could buy, and how big the Kyrian and grain trade had become since the Aiel War. But nothing excused the way everyone seemed ready to lie down and die. She had seen hail ruin food crops in the two rivers, and grasshoppers eat them, and Black Tongue kill the sheep, and Red Spot wither the tabac, so there was nothing to sell when the merchants came down from Bear Lawn. She could remember 2 years in a row when there had been little to eat except turnip soup and old barley, and hunters had been lucky to bring home a scrawny rabbit. But Two Rivers folk picked themselves up when they were knocked down and went back to work. These people had had only one bad year, and their fisheries and their other trade seemed to be flourishing. She had no patience with them. The trouble was, she knew she should have a little patience. They were odd people with odd ways, and things she took for cringing, they seemed to see as a matter of course, even Aylwin and Sandar. She should be able to summon up just a little patience. If for them, why not for Egwene? She put that aside. The child behaved wretchedly, snapping at the most obvious suggestions, objecting to the most sensible things. Even when it was plain what they should do, Egwene wanted to be convinced. Nynaeve was not used to having to convince people, especially not people she had changed swaddling clothes for. The fact that she was only a matter of 7 years older than Egwene was of no account. "It is all those bad dreams," she told herself. "I cannot understand what they mean, and now Elaine and I are having them too, and I do not know what that means either, and Sandar won't say anything except that he is still looking, and I am so frustrated I could just spit." She jerked her braid so hard it hurt. At least she had been able to convince Egwene not to use the ter'angreal again, to put the thing back in her pouch, instead of wearing it next to her skin always. If the Black Aja was in Dragon Reborn, she did not want to think about that possibility. We will find them. I will bring them down, she muttered. Trying to sell me like a sheep, hunting me like an animal. I am the hunter this time, not the rabbit. That Moiraine. If she had never come to Emond's Field, I could have taught Egwene enough. And Rand, I could have done something. That she knew neither was true did not help. It made it worse. She hated Moiraine almost as much as she hated Liandrin and the Black Aja, maybe as much as she hated the Shanchan. She rounded a corner and Juilin Sandar had to leap out of her way to keep from being trampled. Even used to them as he was, he nearly tripped over his own clogs, only his staff saving him from falling on his face in the mud. That pale, ridged wood was called bamboo, she had learned, and it was stronger than it looked. Mistress Mariam, Sandar said, regaining his balance, I was looking for you. He flashed her a nervous smile. Are you angry? Why are you frowning at me that way? She smoothed her chin. I was not frowning at you, Master Sandar. The butcher, it does not matter. Why are you looking for me? Have you found them? He looked around as if he suspected the passers-by of trying to listen. Yes, you must come back.
That was a rough one.
The others are waiting. The others. And Mother Gwenna. Why are you so nervous? You did not let them discover your interest. What has frightened you? No, mistress. I did not reveal myself. His eyes darted again, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a breathy, urgent whisper. These women who seek, they are in the stone. Guests of a High Lord. The High Lord Salmon. Why did you call them thieves? The High Lord Salmon. He squeaked. There was sweat on his face. Inside the stone, with a High Lord. Light. How do we reach them now? She suppressed her impatience with an effort. Be easy, she said soothingly. Be at ease, Master Sandar. We can explain everything to your satisfaction. I hope we can. Light, if you
One second, everyone. I'll be right back.
High Lord, we are searching for them. Come with me to Mother Gwenna's house. Jocelyn, Carola, and I will explain it all to you. Truly. Come. He gave a short, uneasy nod and walked alongside her, keeping his pace to what she could manage with the clogs. He looked as if he wanted to run. At the wise woman's house, she hurried around to the back. No one ever used the front door that she had seen, not even Mother Gwenna herself. The horses were tied to a bamboo hitching rail now, well away from Aylwyn's new figs, as well as her vegetables, with their saddles and bridles stored inside. For once she did not stop to pat Gaidine's nose and tell him he was a good boy and more sensible than his namesake. Sandar halted to scrape mud from his clogs with the butt of his staff, but she hurried inside. Aylwyn Gwenna was sitting in one of her high-backed chairs pulled out into the room, her arms at her sides. The gray-haired woman's eyes were bulging with anger and fear, and she struggled furiously without moving a muscle. Nynaeve did not need to sense the supple weaving of air to know what had happened. Light! They found us! Burn you, Sandar! Rage flooded her, washed away the walls inside that usually kept her from the power, and as the basket fell from her hands, she was a white blossom on a blackthorn bush, opening to embrace Saidar, opening. It was as if she had run into another wall, a wall of clear glass. She could feel the true source, but the wall stopped everything except the ache to be filled with the one power. The basket hit the floor, and as it bounced, the door behind her opened and Liandrin stepped in, followed by a black-haired woman with a white streak above her left ear. They wore long, colorful silk dresses cut to bare their shoulders, and the glow of Saidar surrounded them. Liandrin smoothed her red dress and smiled with that pouting rosebud mouth. Her doll's face was filled with amusement. You see, do you not, Wilder? She began. You have no... Nynaeve hit her in the mouth as hard as she could. Light, I have to get away. She backhanded Rihanna so hard the black-haired woman fell on her silk-covered rump with a grunt. They must have the others, but if I can make it out the door, if I can get far enough away they can't shield me, I can do something. She pushed Leandrin hard, shoving her away from the door. Just let me escape their shielding and I'll... Blows hit her from every side, like fists and sticks, pummeling her. Nearly Leandrin, blood trickling from a corner of her now grim mouth, nor Rihanna, her hair as disarrayed as her green dress, lifted a hand. Nynaeve could feel the flows of air weaving about her as well as she could feel the blows themselves. She still struggled to reach the door, but she realized that she was on her knees now, and the unseen blows would not stop. Invisible sticks and fists striking at her back and her stomach, her head and her hips, her shoulders, her breasts, her legs,
right
her
back.
head. Groaning, she fell onto her side and curled into a ball, trying to protect herself. Oh, Light, I tried. Egwene, Elaine, I tried. I will not cry out. Burn you, you can beat me to death, but I won't cry. The blows stopped, but Nynaeve could not stop quivering. She felt bruised and battered from crown to toe. Leandrin crouched beside her, arms around her knees, silk rustling against silk. She had wiped the blood away from her mouth. Her dark eyes were hard, and there was no amusement on her face now. Perhaps you are too stupid to know when you are defeated, Wilder. You fought almost as wildly as that other foolish girl, that Egwene. She almost went mad. You must all learn to submit. You will learn to submit. Nynaeve shivered and reached for Saidar again. It was not that she had any real hope, but she had to do something. Forcing through her pain, she reached out and struck that invisible shield. Leandrin did have amusement back in her eyes now, the grim mirth of a nasty child who pulls the wings off flies. We have no use for this one, at least, Rihanna said, standing beside Aylwyn. I will stop her heart. Aylwyn's eyes nearly came out of her head. No! Leandrin's short, honey-colored braids swung as her head snapped around. Always you kill too quickly, and only the great Lord can make use of the dead. She smiled at the woman held to the chair by invisible bonds. You saw the soldiers who came with us, old woman. You know who waits for us in the stone. The High Lord Salmon, he will not be pleased if you speak of what happened inside your house today. If you hold your tongue, you will live, perhaps to serve them again one day. If you speak, you will serve only the great Lord of the Dark from beyond the grave. Which do you choose? Suddenly, Aylwyn could move her head. She shook her gray curls, working her mouth. I will hold my tongue, she said dejectedly, then gave Nynaeve an embarrassed, shamed look. If I speak, what good will it do? A High Lord could have my head by raising an eyebrow. What good can I do you, girl? What good? It is all right, Nynaeve said wearily. Who could she tell? All she could do is die. I know you would help if you could. Rihanna threw back her head and laughed. Aylwyn slumped, released completely, but she only sat there, staring at her hands in her lap. Between them, Leandrin and Rihanna pulled Nynaeve to her feet and pushed her toward the front of the house. You give us any trouble, the black-haired woman said in a hard voice, and I will make you peel off your own skin and dance in your bones. Nynaeve almost laughed. What trouble could I give? She was shielded from the true source. Her bruises ached so much she could barely stand. Anything she might do they could handle like a child's tantrum. But my bruises will heal, burn you, and you'll make a slip yet. And when you do... There were others in the front room of the house, 2 big soldiers in rimmed round helmets and shiny breastplates over those puffy-sleeved red coats. The 2 men had sweat on their faces, and their dark eyes rolled as if they were as afraid as she. Amiko Nagoyan was there, slender and pretty with her long neck and pale skin, looking as innocent as a girl gathering flowers. Joya Bier had a friendly face despite that smooth-cheeked calm of a woman who has worked long with the power, almost a grandmother's face in its welcoming appearance, though her age had put no touch of gray in her dark hair, any more than it had wrinkled her skin. Her gray eyes looked more like those of the stepmother in the stories, the one who murdered the children of her husband's first wife. Both women shone with the power. Elaine stood between the two black sisters with a bruised eye and a swollen cheek and a split lip, one sleeve of her dress torn halfway off. "I am sorry, Nynaeve," she said thickly, as if her jaw hurt. "We never saw them until it was too late." Egwene lay in a crumpled heap on the floor, her face swollen with bruises, almost unrecognizable. As Nynaeve and her escort came in, one of the big soldiers hoisted Egwene over his shoulder. She dangled there as limply as a half-empty barley sack. "What did you do to her?" Nynaeve demanded. "Burn you, what—" Something unseen struck her across the mouth, hard enough to make her eyes go blank for a moment. Now, Joya Bier said, with a smile that her eyes belied. "I will not stand for demands or bad language." She sounded like a grandmother, too. "You speak when you are spoken to." "I told you, the girl, she would not stop fighting, yes?" Liandrin said. "Let it be a lesson to you. If you try to cause any trouble, you will be treated no more gently." Nynaeve ached to do something for Egwene, but she let herself be pushed out into the street. She made them push her. It was a small way of fighting back, refusing to cooperate, but it was all she had at the moment. There were few people in the muddy street, as if everyone had decided it was much better to be somewhere else, and those few scurried by on the other side without a glance at the shiny black lacquered coach standing behind a team of 6 matched whites with tall white plumes on their bridles. A coachman dressed like the soldiers but without armor or swords sat on the seat, and another opened the door as they appeared from the house. Before he did, Nynaeve saw the sigil painted there, a silver gauntleted fist clutching jagged lightning bolts. She supposed it was High Lord Salmon's sign. A dark friend he must be if he deals with the Black Ajah. The light burn him. But she was more interested in the man who dropped to his knees in the mud at their appearance. "Burn you, Sandar! Why—" She jumped as something that felt like a stick of wood struck her across the shoulders. Joya Bier smiled chidingly and waggled a finger. "You will be respectful, child, or you might lose that tongue." Liandrin laughed. Tangling a hand in Sandar's black hair, she wrenched his head back. He stared up at her with the eyes of a faithful hound, or of a cur expecting a kick. "Do not be too hard on this man." She even made man sound like dog. "He had to be persuaded to serve. But I am very good at persuading, no?" She laughed again. Sandar turned a confused stare on Nynaeve. "I had to do it, Mistress Mariam. I had to." Liandrin twisted his hair, and his eyes went back to her, the anxious hounds once more. Light, Nynaeve thought. What did they do to him? What are they going to do to us? She and Elaine were bundled roughly into the coach, with Egwene slumped between them, her head lolling, and Liandrin and Rhianna climbed in and took the seat facing forward. The glow of Saidar still surrounded them. Where the others went, Nynaeve did not much care at that moment. She wanted to reach Egwene, to touch her, to comfort her hurts, but she could not move a muscle below her neck except to writhe. Flows of air bound the three of them like layers of tightly wrapped blankets. The coach lurched into motion, swaying hard in the mud despite its leather springs. "If you have hurt her—" "Light, I can see they've hurt her. Why don't I say what I mean?" But it was almost as hard to force the words out as it would have been to lift a hand. "If you have killed her, I won't rest till you are all hunted down like wild dogs." Rhianna glared, but Liandrin only sniffed. "Do not be a complete fool, Wilder. You are wanted alive. Dead bait will catch nothing." "Bait? For what? For who?" "You are the fool, Liandrin. Do you think we are here alone? Only 3 of us and not even full Aes Sedai? We are bait, Liandrin, and you have walked into the trap like a fat grouse." "Do not tell her that," Elaine said sharply. and Nynaeve blinked before she realized Elaine was helping her fabrication. If you let your anger get the best of you, you will tell them what they must not hear. They must take us inside the stone. They must be quiet, Nynaeve snapped. You are letting your tongue run away with you. Elaine managed to look abashed behind her bruises. Let them chew on that, Nynaeve thought. But Leandrin only smiled. Once your time as bait is done, you will tell us everything. You will want to. They say you will be very strong one day, but I will make sure you will always obey me, even before the great Master Balal works his plans for you. He is sending for Myrddraal, 13 of them. Those rosebud lips laughed the final words. Nynaeve felt her stomach twist. One of the Forsaken. Her brain numbed with shock. The Dark One and all the Forsaken are bound in Shayol Ghul, bound by the Creator in the moment of creation. But the catechism did not help. She knew too well how much of it was false. Then the rest of it came home to her. 13 Myrddraal. And 13 sisters of the Black Ajah. She heard Elaine screaming before she realized she was screaming herself, jerking uselessly in those invisible bonds of air. It was impossible to say which was louder, their despairing screams, or the laughter from Leandrin and Rhianna.
Chapter 52. In Search of a Remedy. Slumped on the stool in the Gleeman's room, Matt grimaced as Tom coughed again. How are we going to keep looking if he's so bloody sick he can't walk? He was ashamed as soon as he thought it. Tom had been as assiduous in searching as he had, pushing himself day and night when he had to know he was coming down sick. Matt had been so absorbed in his hunt that he had paid too little attention to Tom's coughing. The change from constant rain to steamy heat had not helped it. Come on, Tom, he said. Lopar says there's a wise woman not far. That is what they call a wisdom here, a wise woman. Wouldn't Nynaeve like that? I do not need any foul-tasting concoctions poured down my throat, boy. Tom stuffed a fist through his mustaches in a vain attempt to stop his hacking. You go ahead looking. Just give me a few hours on my bed, and I'll join you. The racking wheezes doubled him over till his head was almost on his knees. So I'm supposed to do all the work while you take your ease? Matt said lightly. How can I find anything without you? You learn most of what we hear. That was not exactly true. Men talked as freely over dice as they did while buying a Gleeman a cup of wine. More freely than they did with a Gleeman hacking so hard they feared contagion. But he was beginning to think that Tom's cough was not going to go away by itself. If the old goat dies on me, who will I play stones with? He told himself roughly. Anyway, your bloody coughing keeps me awake even in the next room. Ignoring the white-haired man's protests, he pulled Tom to his feet. He was shocked at how much of the Gleeman's weight he had to support. Despite the damp heat, Tom insisted on his patch-covered cloak. Matt had his own coat unbuttoned completely and all 3 ties of his shirt undone. But he let the old goat have his way. No one in the common room even looked up as he half-carried Tom out into the muggy afternoon. The innkeeper had given simple directions, but when they reached the gate and faced the mud of the mola, Matt almost turned back to ask another wise woman. There had to be more than one in a city this size. Tom's wheezing decided him. With a grimace, Matt stepped off into the mud, half-carrying the Gleeman. He had thought from the directions that they must have passed the wise woman's house on their way up from the dock that first night. When he saw the long, narrow house with bunches of herbs hanging in the windows, right next to a potter's shop, he remembered it. Lopar had said something about going to the back door, but he had had enough of mud. And the stink of fish, he thought, frowning at the barefoot men squelching by with their baskets on their backs. There were tracks of horses in the street, too, just beginning to be obliterated by feet and ox carts. Horses pulling a wagon, or maybe a carriage. He had seen nothing but oxen drawing carts or wagons, either one in Tyr. The nobles and the merchants were proud of their fine stock, and never let one be put to anything like work. But he had not seen any carriages since leaving the walled city, either. Dismissing horses and wheel tracks from his mind, he took Tom to the front door and knocked. After a time, he knocked again. Then again. He was on the point of giving up and returning to the White Crescent despite Tom coughing on his shoulder when he heard shuffling footsteps inside. The door opened barely more than a crack, and a stout, gray-haired woman peered out. "What do you want?" she asked in a tired voice. Matt put on his best grin. "Light, but I am getting sick myself at all these people who sound like there's no bloody hope. Mother
I'll
Gwen,
be right.
my
Excuse
name
me.
is
I'll be
Matt
right
Coffin.
back, everyone.
Kavan Lopar told me you might do something for my friend's cough. I can pay well." She studied them a moment, seemed to listen to Tom's wheezes, then sighed. "I suppose I can still do that, at least. You might as well come in." She swung the door open and was already plodding toward the back of the house before Matt moved. Her accent sounded so much like the Amerlin's that he shivered, but he followed, all but carrying Tom. "I don't need this," the Gleeman wheezed. "Bloody mixtures always taste like dung." "Shut up, Tom." Leading them all the way to the kitchen, the stout woman rummaged in one of the cupboards, taking out small stone pots and packets of herbs while muttering to herself. Matt sat Tom down in one of the high-backed chairs and glanced through the nearest window. There were 3 good horses tied out back. He was surprised the wise woman had more than one, or any for that matter. He had not seen anyone in Tyr riding except nobles and the wealthy, and these animals looked as if they had cost more than a little silver. Horses again. I don't care about bloody horses now. Mother Guena brewed some sort of strong tea with a rank smell and forced it down Tom's throat, holding his nose when he tried to complain. Matt decided she had less fat on her than he had thought, from the way she held the Gleeman's head steady in the crook of one arm while she poured the black liquid into him, no matter how hard he tried to stop her. When she took the cup away, Tom coughed and scrubbed at his mouth with equal vigor. "Gah, woman, I don't know whether you mean to drown me or kill me with a taste. You ought to be a bloody blacksmith." "You will take the same twice a day till that hacking is gone," she said firmly. "And I have a salve that I'll rub on your chest every night." Some of the weariness left her voice as she confronted the Gleeman, fists on her broad hips. "That salve stinks as bad as this tea tastes, but you will rub it on, thoroughly, or I'll drag you upstairs like a scrawny carp in a net and tie you to a bed with that cloak of yours. I never had a Gleeman come to me before, and I'll not let the first one that does cough himself to death." Tom glowered and blew out his mustaches with a cough, but he seemed to take her threat seriously. At least he did not say anything, but he looked as if he meant to throw her tea and her salve right back at her. The more this Mother Guena talked, the more she sounded like the Amerlin to Matt. From the sour look on Tom's face and the steady stare on hers, he decided he had better smooth matters over a little before the Gleeman refused to take her medicines. And she decided to make him. "I knew a woman once who talked like you," he said. "All fish and nets and things. Sounded like you, too. The same accent, I mean. I suppose she's Tyran." "Perhaps." The gray-haired woman suddenly sounded tired again, and she kept staring at the floor. "I knew some girls with the sound of your speech on their tongues, too. 2 of them had it anyway." She sighed heavily. Matt felt his scalp prickle. My luck can't be this good. But he would not bet a copper on 2 other women with 2 Rivers accents just happening to be in Tyr. 3 girls. Young women, named Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine. That one has hair like the sun and blue eyes. She frowned at him. "Those were not the names they gave," she said slowly. "Yet I suspected they did not give me their true names. But they had their reasons, I thought. One of them was a pretty girl with bright blue eyes and red gold hair to her shoulders." She described Nynaeve with her braid to her waist, and Egwene with her big dark eyes and ruddy smile, too. 3 pretty women as different from one another as they could be. "I see they are the ones you know," she finished. "I'm sorry, boy." "Why are you sorry? I've been trying to find them for days." "Light, I walked right past this place the first night. Right past them. I wanted random. What could be more random than where a ship docks on a rainy night, and where you happen to look in a bloody lightning flash? Burn me, burn me." "Tell me where they are, Mother Guena." The gray-haired woman stared wearily at the stove where her spouted kettle was steaming. Her mouth worked, but she said nothing. "Where are they?" Matt demanded. "It is important. They are in danger if I don't find them." "You do not understand," she said softly. "You are an outlander. The High Lords—" "I do not care about any—" Matt blinked and looked at Tom. The gleeman seemed to be frowning, but he was coughing so hard Matt could not be sure. "What do the High Lords have to do with my friends?" "You just do not—" "Don't tell me I do not understand. I will pay for the information." Mother Gwena glared at him. "I do not take money for—" She grimaced fiercely. "You asked me to tell you things I have been told not to speak of. You know what will happen to me if I do, and you breathe my name? I will lose my tongue to begin. Then I will lose other parts before the High Lords have what is left of me hung up to scream its last hours as a reminder to others to obey. And it will do those young women no good, not my telling or my dying. I promise I will never mention your name to anyone. I swear it. And I'll keep that oath, old woman, if you'll only tell me where they bloody are. Please, they are in danger." She studied him for a long time. Before she was done, he had the feeling she knew every detail of him. "On that oath, I will tell you. I liked them. But you can do nothing. You are too late, Matrim Cawthon. Too late by nearly 3 hours. They have been taken to the stone. The High Lord Saman sent for them." She shook her head in worried puzzlement. "He sent women who could channel. I hold nothing against Aes Sedai myself, but that is against the law. The law the High Lords made. If they break every other law, they would not break that one. Why would a High Lord send Aes Sedai on his errands? Why would he want those girls at all?" Matt almost burst out laughing. "Aes Sedai, Mother Gwena, you had my heart in my throat, and maybe my liver too. If Aes Sedai came for them, there is nothing to worry about. All 3 of them are going to be Aes Sedai themselves. Not that I like it much, but that's what they—" His grin faded at the heavy way she shook her head. "Boy, those girls fought like lionfish in a net. Whether they mean to be Aes Sedai or not, those who took them treated them like bilge pumpings.
I'll be right back.
Friends do not
Forgot
give
something.
bruises like that." He felt his face twisting. Aes Sedai hurt them? What in the light? The bloody stone. It makes the palace in Camelin look like walking into a barnyard. Burn me. I stood right out there in the rain and stared at this house. Burn me for a bloody light-blinded fool. "If you break your hand," Mother Gwena said, "I will splint and poultice it. But if you damage my wall, I will strip your hide like a redfish." He blinked, then looked at his fist, at scraped knuckles. He did not even remember punching the wall. The broad woman took his hand in a strong grip, but the fingers she used to probe were surprisingly gentle. "Nothing broken," she grunted after a while. Her eyes were just as gentle as she studied his face. "It seems you care for them. One of them, at least." "I suppose it is." "I am sorry, Matt Cawthon." "Don't be," he told her. "At least I know where they are now. All I have to do is get them out." He fished out his last 2 Andoran gold crowns and pressed them into her hand. "For Tom's medicines, and for letting me know about the girls." On impulse, he gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and a grin. "And that's for me." Startled, she touched her cheek, not seeming to know whether to look at the coins or him. "Get them out, you say? Just like that? Out of the stone?" Abruptly, she stabbed him in the ribs with a finger as hard as a tree stub. "You remind me of my husband, Matt Cawthon. He was a headstrong fool who would sail into the teeth of a gale and laugh too. I can almost think you'll manage it." Suddenly, she saw his muddy boots, apparently for the first time. "It took me 6 months to teach him not to track mud into my house. If you do get those girls out, whichever of them you have your eye on will have a hard time training you to make you fit to be let inside." You are the only woman who could do that, he said with a grin that broadened at her glare. Get them out. That's all I have to do. Bring them out of the stone of bloody tear. Tom coughed again. He isn't going into the stone like that. Only how do I stop him? Mother Gwenna, can I leave my friend here? I think he is too sick to go back to the inn.
What?
Tom barked. He tried to push himself out of the chair, coughing so he could hardly speak.
I am no such thing, boy. You think walking into the stone will be like walking into your mother's kitchen? You think you would make it as far as the gates without me?
He hung on the back of the chair, his wheezing and hacking keeping him from rising more than halfway to his feet. Mother Gwenna put a hand on his shoulder and pushed him back down as easily as a child. The gleeman gave her a startled look. I will take care of him, Matt Cawthon, she said.
No,
Tom shouted.
you cannot do this to me. You can't leave me with this old...
Only her hand on his shoulder kept him from doubling over. Matt grinned at the white-haired man. I've enjoyed knowing you, Tom. As he hurried out into the street, he found himself wondering why he had said that. He isn't going to bloody die. That woman will keep him alive if she has to drag him kicking and screaming out of his grave by his mustaches. Yes, but who's going to keep me alive? Ahead of him, the stone of Tyr loomed over the city, impregnable, a fortress besieged 100 times, a stone on which 100 armies had broken their teeth. And he had to get inside somehow and bring out 3 women somehow. With a laugh that made even the sullen folk in the street look at him, he headed back for the White Crescent, uncaring of mud or the damp heat. He could feel the dice tumbling inside his head. Chapter 53. A Flow of Spirit. Perrin shrugged into his coat as he walked back toward the star through the evening shadows. A good tiredness soaked through his arms and shoulders. Along with more common work, Master Ajala had had him make a large piece of ornamental work, all elaborate curves and scrolls to go on some country lord's new gate. He had enjoyed making something so pretty. I thought his eyes would come out of his face, blacksmith, when you said you would not make that thing if it was for a high lord. He glanced sideways at Zareen, walking beside him, the shadows masking her face. Even for his eyes, the shadows were there, just fainter than they would have been for another's. They emphasized her high cheekbones, softened the strong curve of her nose. He just could not make up his mind about her. Even if Moraine and Lan still insisted they stay close to the inn, he wished she could find something else to do besides watch him work. For some reason, he found himself growing awkward whenever he thought of her tilted eyes on him. More than once he had fumbled with his hammer till Master Ajala frowned at him wonderingly. Girls had always been able to make him feel awkward, especially when they smiled at him, but Zareen did not have to smile. Only look. He wondered again if she was the beautiful woman Min had warned him against. Better if she is the falcon. That thought surprised him so much that he stumbled. I do not want anything I make to get into the hands of one of the Forsaken. His eyes glowed golden as he looked at her. If it was for a High Lord, how could I tell where it might end? She shivered. I did not mean to frighten you, Zareen. She smiled broadly, no doubt thinking he could not see her. You will fall yet, farm boy. Have you ever thought of wearing a beard? It is bad enough she's always mocking me, but half the time I do not even understand her. As they reached the front door of the inn, Moraine and Lan met them, coming the other way. Moraine wore that linen cloak with the wide, deep hood that hid her face. Light from the common room windows made yellow pools in the paving stones. 2 or 3 carriages rumbled past, and there were perhaps a dozen people in sight, hurrying home for their suppers. But for the most part, shadows populated the street. The weaver's shop was closed tight. The silence was deafening. Rand is in Tyr. The Aes Sedai's cool voice issued from the depths of her hood as from a cavern. Are you sure? Baron asked. I have not heard of anything strange happening. No weddings or wells drying up. He saw Zareen frown in confusion. Moraine had not been forthcoming with her, and neither had he. Keeping Loyal's tongue silent had been more difficult. Don't you listen to rumors, blacksmith? The warder said. There have been marriages. As many in the last 4 days as in half a year before. And as many murders as in a whole year. A child fell from a tower balcony today, 100 paces onto stone paving. She got up and ran to her mother without a bruise. The 1st of Mayenne, a guest in the stone since before winter, announced today that she will submit to the will of the High Lords after saying yesterday she would see Mayenne and all its ships burned before one tyrant country lord set foot in the city. They had not brought themselves to torture her, and that young woman has a will like iron. So you tell me if you think it might be Rand's doing. Blacksmith, from top to bottom, tear bubbles like a cauldron.
These things were not needed to tell me, Moraine said. Baron, did you dream of Rand last night?
Yes, he admitted. He was in the heart of the stone, holding that sword. He felt Zareen shift beside him. But I have been worrying about that so much, it is no wonder I dream of it. I had nothing but nightmares last night.
A tall man, Zareen said, with reddish hair and gray eyes, holding something that shines so brightly it hurts your eyes, in a place that is all great red stone columns. Blacksmith, tell me that was not your dream.
You see, Moraine said,
I have heard this dream spoken of 100 times today.
They all speak of nightmares.
Bilal apparently does not care to shield his dreams,
but that one above all else.
She laughed suddenly, like low, cool chimes. People say he is the Dragon Reborn. They say he is coming. They whisper it fearfully in corners, but they say it.
And what of Bilal?
Perrin asked.
Moraine's reply was cold-drawn steel.
I will deal with him tonight.
There was no fear sent from her. We will deal with him tonight, Van told her.
Yes, my Guidine. We will deal with him.
And what do we do? Sit here and wait? I had enough waiting to last me a lifetime in the mountains, Moraine.
You and Loyal and Zareen will go to Tarvalon, she told him, until this is done. It will be the safest place for you.
Where is the Ogier? Lan said. I want all 3 of you on your way north as soon as possible. Upstairs, I suppose, Perrin said. In his room, or maybe the dining room. There are lights in the windows up there. He is always working on those notes of his. I suppose he will have plenty to say in his book about us running away. He was surprised at the bitterness in his voice.
Fight, fool? You want to face one of the Forsaken? No. No, but I am tired of running. I remember not running once. I remember fighting back, and it was better. Even if I thought I was going to die, it was better.
I will find him, Zareen announced. I have no shame in admitting I will be glad enough to run from this fight. Men fight when they should run, and fools fight when they should run. But I have no need to say it twice. She strode ahead of them, her narrow, divided skirts making small whisking noises as they entered the inn. Perrin glanced around the common room as they followed her toward the stairs in the back. There were fewer men at the tables than he expected. Some sat alone with dull eyes, but where 2 or 3 sat together, they talked in frightened whispers his ears could barely catch. Even so, he heard dragon 3 times. As he reached the top of the stairs, he heard another soft sound, a thump as of something falling in the private dining room. He peered that way along the hall. Zareen? There was no answer. He felt the hair on the back of his neck shift and patted that way. Zareen? He pushed open the door.
Fail!
She was lying on the floor near the table. As he started to rush into the room, Moraine's commanding shout halted him.
Stop, you fool! Stop for your life!
She came along the hallway slowly, head turning as if she were listening for something or searching for something. Lan followed with his hand on his sword, and a look in his eyes if he already knew steel would do no good. She came abreast of the door and stopped.
Move back, Perrin. Move back!
In agony, he stared at Zareen, at Fail. She lay there as if lifeless. Finally, he made himself step back from the door, leaving it open, standing where he could see her. She looked as if she were dead. He could not see her chest stir. He wanted to howl. Frowning, he worked his hand, the one he had used to push the door into the room, opening and closing his fingers. It tingled sharply as if he had struck his elbow. Aren't you going to do anything, Moraine? If you will not, I am going to her. Stand still, or you will go nowhere, she said calmly. What is that by her right hand? As if it dropped from her grip when she fell. I cannot make it out. He glared at her, then peered into the room. A hedgehog. It looks like a hedgehog carved out of wood. Moraine, tell me what is going on. What has happened? Tell me. A hedgehog, she murmured. A hedgehog. Be silent, Perrin. I must think. I felt it trigger. I can sense the residues of the flows woven to set it. Spirit. Pure spirit. And nothing else. Almost nothing uses pure flows of spirit. Why does that hedgehog make me think of spirit? You felt what trigger, Moraine? What was set? A trap? Yes, a trap, she said, irritation making tiny cracks in her cool serenity. A trap meant for me. I would have been first into that room if Zareen had not rushed ahead. Len and I would surely have gone there to plan and wait for supper. I will not wait on supper now. Be quiet if you wish me to help the girl at all. Lan, bring me that innkeeper. The warder flowed away down the stairs. Moraine paced up and down in the hall, sometimes stopping to peer through the door from the depths of her hood. Perrin could see no sign that Zareen lived. Her breast did not stir. He tried listening for her heartbeat, but even for his ears it was impossible. When Lan returned, shoving a frightened Jura Harat ahead of him by the scruff of his fat neck, the Aes Sedai rounded on the balding man. You promised to keep this room for me, Master Harat. Her voice was as hard, as precise as a skinning knife. To allow not even a serving woman to enter to clean unless I was present. Who did you let enter it, Master Harat? Tell me! Harat shook like a bowl of pudding. Only the two ladies, mistress. They wish to leave a surprise for you. I swear, mistress. They showed it to me. A little hedgehog. They said you would be surprised. I was surprised, innkeeper, she said softly. Leave me! And if you whisper a word of this, even in your sleep, I will pull this inn down and leave only a hole in the ground. Yes, mistress, he whispered. I swear it. I do swear. Go! The innkeeper fell to his knees in his haste to reach the stairs and went scrambling down with thumps that suggested he fell more than once as he ran. He knows I am here, Moraine told the warder. And he has found someone of the Black Ajah to set his trap. Yet perhaps he thinks I am caught in it. It was a tiny flash of the power, but perhaps he is strong enough to have sensed it. Then he will not suspect we are coming, Lan said quietly. He almost smiled. Perrin stared at them, his teeth bared. What about her? He demanded. What was done to her, Moraine? Is she alive? I cannot see her breathe. She is alive, Moraine said slowly. I dare not go close enough to her to tell much beyond that. But she is alive. She sleeps, in a way, as a bear sleeps in the winter. Her heart beats so slowly you could count minutes between. Her breathing is the same. She sleeps. Even from within that hood, he could feel her eyes on him. I fear she is not there, Perrin. Not in her body any longer. What do you mean she is not in her body? Light, you don't mean they took her soul, like the Grey Men? Moraine shook her head, and he drew a relieved breath. His chest hurt as if he had not breathed since she last spoke. Then where is she, Moraine? I do not know, she said. I have a suspicion, but I do not know. A suspicion? A hint? Anything? Burn me where? Lan shifted at the roughness in his voice, but he knew he would try to break the water like iron over a hardy if the man tried to stop him. Where? I know very little, Perrin. Moraine's voice was like cold, unfeeling music. I have remembered the little I know of what connects a carved hedgehog with spirit. The carving is a Tir on Grial, last studied by Corian and Adil. the last dreamer of the tower had. The talent called dreaming is a thing of spirit, Baron. It is not a thing I have ever studied. My talents lie in other ways. I believe that Zareen has been trapped inside a dream, perhaps even the world of dreams, till Aranriad. All that is her is inside that dream. All. A dreamer sends only a part of herself. If Zareen does not return soon, her body will die. Perhaps she will live on in the dream. I do not know. There is too much you don't know, Baron muttered. He peered into the room and wanted to cry. Zareen looked so small, lying there, so helpless. Fail, I swear I will only call you Fail ever again. Why don't you do something? The trap has been sprung, Baron, but it is a trap that will still catch anyone who steps into that room. I would not reach your side before it took me, and I have work I must do tonight. Burn you, Aes Sedai! Burn your work! This world of dreams, is it like the wolf dreams? You said these dreamers sometimes saw wolves. I have told you what I can, she said sharply. It is time for you to go. Lan and I must be on our way to the stone. There can be no waiting now. No. He said it quietly, but when Moraine opened her mouth, he raised his voice. No! I will not leave her. The Aes Sedai took a deep breath. Very well, Baron. Her voice was ice, calm, smooth, cold. Remain if you wish. Perhaps you will survive this night. Lan? She and the warders strode down the hall to their rooms. In moments they returned, Lan wearing his color-changing cloak, and vanished down the stairs without another word to him. He stared through the open door at Fail. I have to do something. If it is like the wolf dreams.
Perrin,
Came Loyal's deep rumble.
what is this about Fail?
The Ogier came striding down the hall in his shirt sleeves, ink on his fingers and a pen in his hand.
Lan told me I had to go, and then he said something about Fail in a trap. What did he mean?
Distractedly, Perrin told him what Moraine had said. It might work. It might. It has to. He was surprised when Loyal growled.
No, Perrin, it is not right. Fail was so free. It is not right to trap her.
Perrin peered up at Loyal's face and suddenly remembered the old stories that claimed Ogier were implacable enemies. Loyal's ears had laid back along the sides of his head, and his broad face was as hard as an anvil. Loyal, I'm going to try to help Fail, but I will be helpless myself while I do. Will you guard my back? Loyal raised those huge hands that held books so carefully, and his thick fingers curled as if to crush stone.
No one will pass me while I live, Perrin. Not Murdrawl or the Dark One himself.
He said it like a simple statement of fact. Perrin nodded and looked through the door again. It has to work. I don't care if Min warned me against her or not. With a snarl, he leaped toward Fail, stretching out his hand. He thought he touched her ankle before he was gone. Whether this dream of the trap was Tel'aran'rhiod or not, Perrin did not know, but he knew it for the wolf dream. Rolling grassy hills surrounded him and scattered thickets. He saw deer browsing at the edges of the trees, and a herd of some sort of running animal bounding across the grass like brown-striped deer, but with long, straight horns. The smells in the wind told him they were good to eat, and other scents spoke of more good hunting all around him. This was the wolf dream. He was wearing the blacksmith's long leather vest, he realized, with his arms bare. And there was a weight at his side. He touched the axe belt, but it was not the axe hanging from its loop. He ran his fingers over the head of the heavy smith's hammer. It felt right. Hopper alighted in front of him. Again you come, like a fool. The sending was of a cub sticking its nose into a hollow tree trunk to lap honey despite the bees stinging its muzzle and eyes. The danger is greater than ever, young bull. Evil things walk the dream. The brothers and sisters avoid the mountains of stone the two legs pile up, and almost fear to dream to one another.
You must go.
No, Perrin said. Fail is here somewhere, trapped. I have to find her, Hopper. I have to. He felt a shifting inside him, something changing. He looked down at his curly-haired legs and his wide paws. He was an even larger wolf than Hopper. You are here too strongly. Every sending carried shock. You will die, young wolf. If I do not free the falcon, I do not care, brother. Then we hunt, brother. Noses to the wind, the two wolves ran across the plain, seeking the falcon. Chapter 54. Into the Stone. The rooftops of Tyr were no place for a sensible man to be in the night, Matt decided as he peered into the moon shadows. A little more than 50 paces of broad street, or perhaps narrow plaza, separated the stone from his tiled roof, itself 3 stories above the paving stones. But when was I ever sensible? The only people I ever met who were sensible all the time were so boring that watching them could put you to sleep. Whether the thing was a street or a plaza, he had followed it all the way around the stone since nightfall. The only place it did not go was on the riverside, where the Aranin ran right along the foot of the fortress, and nothing interrupted it except the city wall. That wall was only 2 houses to his right. So far, the top of the wall seemed the best path to the stone, but not one he would be overjoyed to take. Picking up his quarterstaff and a small wire-handled tin box, he moved carefully to a brick chimney a little nearer the wall. The roll of fireworks, what had been the roll of fireworks before he worked on it back in his room, shifted on his back. It was more of a bundle now, all jammed together as tight as he could make it, but still too big for carrying around rooftops in the dark. Earlier, a slip of his foot because of the thing had sent a roof tile skittering over the edge and roused the man sleeping in a room below to bellow, "Thief!" and send him running. He hitched the bundle back into position without thinking about it and crouched in the shadows of the chimney. After a moment, he set the tin box down. The wire handle was beginning to grow uncomfortably warm. It felt a little safer, studying the stone from the shadows, but not much more encouraging. The city wall was not nearly as thick as those he had seen in other places, in Camelin or Tervalan. No more than a pace wide, supported by great stone buttresses cloaked in darkness now. A pace was more than sufficient width for walking, of course, except that the fall to either side was nearly 10 spans. Through the dark to hard pavement. But some of these bloody houses back right up against it. I can make it to the top easily enough. And a bloody runs straight to the bloody stone. It did that, but that was no particular comfort. The sides of the stone looked like cliffs. Eyeing the height again, he told himself he should be able to climb it. Of course I can, just like those cliffs in the mountains of mist. Over 100 paces straight up before there was a battlement. There must be arrow slits lower down, but he could not make them out in the night. And he could not squeeze through an arrow slit. 100 bloody paces. Maybe 120. Burn me, even Rand would not try to climb that. But it was the one way in he had found. Every gate he had seen had been shut tight and looked strong enough to stop a herd of bulls, not to mention a dozen or so soldiers guarding very nearly every last one, in helmets and breastplates, and swords at their belts. Suddenly he blinked and squinted at the side of the stone. There was some fool climbing it, just visible as a moving shadow in the moonlight, and over halfway up already, with a drop of 70 paces to the pavement under his feet. Fool, is he? Well, I'm as big a one because I'm going up too. Burn me, he'll probably raise an alarm in there and get me caught. He could not see the climber anymore. Who in the light is he? What does it matter who he is? Burn me, but this is a bloody way to win a wager. I'm going to want a kiss from all of them, even Nynaeve. He shifted to peer toward the wall, trying to choose his spot to climb, and suddenly there was steel across his throat. Without thinking, he knocked it away and swept the man's feet out from under him with his staff. Someone else kicked his own feet away, and he fell almost on top of the man he had knocked down. He rolled off onto the roof tiles, loosing the bundle of fireworks. If that falls into the street, I'll break their necks. Staff whirling, he felt it strike flesh, and a second time heard grunts. Then there were 2 blades at his throat. He froze, arms outflung. The points of short spears, dull so they hardly caught the faint light of the moon at all, pressed into his flesh just short of bringing blood. His eyes followed them up to the faces of whoever was holding them, but their heads were shrouded, their faces veiled in black except for their eyes, staring at him. Burn me. I have to run into real thieves. What happened to my luck? He put on a grin with plenty of teeth so they could see it in the moonlight. I do not mean to trouble you in your work, so if you let me go my way, I'll let you go yours and say nothing. The veiled men did not move, and neither did their spears. I want no more outcry than you. I'll not betray you. They stood like statues, staring down at him. Burn me, I do not have time for this. Time to toss the dice. For a chilling moment, he thought the words in his head had been strange. He tightened his grip on the quarterstaff, lying out to one side of him, and almost cried out when someone stepped hard on his wrist. He rolled his eyes to see who. Burn me for a fool, I forgot the one I fell on. But he saw another shape moving behind the one standing on his wrist, and decided maybe it was as well he had not managed to bring the staff into use after all.
It's okay.
It was a soft boot, laced to the knee, that rested on his arm. It tugged at his memory. Something about a man met in mountains. He eyed the nightcloak shape the rest of the way up, trying to make out the cut and colors of his clothes. They seemed all shadow, colors that belonged with the darkness too well to see them clearly. Passed a long-bladed knife at the fellow's waist, right up to the dark veil across his face. A black-veiled face. Black-veiled. Aiel! Burn me! What are bloody Aiel doing here? He had a sinking feeling in his stomach as he remembered hearing that Aiel veiled themselves when they killed. Yes, said a man's voice. We are Aiel. Matt gave a start. He had not realized he had spoken aloud. You dance well for one caught by surprise, a young woman's voice said. He thought she was the one standing on his wrist. Perhaps another day I will have time to dance with you properly. He started to smile. If she wants to dance, they can't be going to kill me at least. Then frowned instead. He seemed to remember Aiel sometimes meant something different when they said that. The spears were pulled back, and hands hauled him to his feet. He shook them away and brushed himself off, as if he were standing in a common room instead of on a night-cloaked rooftop with 4 Aiel. It always paid to let the other man know you had a steady nerve. The Aiel had quivers at their waists as well as knives, and more of those short spears on their backs with cased bows, the long spear points sticking up above their shoulders. He heard himself humming, I'm down at the bottom of the well, and stopped it. What do you do here? The man's voice asked. With the veils, Matt was not entirely sure which one had spoken. The voice sounded older, confident, used to command. He thought he could pick out the woman at least. She was the only one shorter than he, and that not by much. The others all stood a head taller than he or more. Bloody Aiel, he thought. We have watched you for some little time, the older man went on. Watched you watch the stone. You have studied it from every side. Why? I could ask the same of all of you, another voice said. Matt was the only one who gave a start as a man in baggy breeches stepped out of the shadows. The fellow appeared to be shoeless, for better footing on the tiles. I expected to find thieves, not Aiel, the man went on. But do not think your numbers frighten me. A slim staff no taller than his head made a blur and a hum as he whirled it. My name is Julin Sundar, and I am a thief catcher. And I would know why you were on the rooftops, staring at the stone. Matt shook his head. How many bloody people are on the roofs tonight? All that was needed was for Tom to appear and play his harp, or someone to come looking for an inn. A bloody thief-taker? He wondered why the Aiel were just standing there. You stalk well for a city man, the older man's voice said. But why do you follow us? We have stolen nothing. Why have you looked so often at the stone tonight yourself? Even in the moonlight, this Sandar's surprise was evident. He gave a start, opened his mouth, and closed it again as 4 more Aiel rose out of the dimness behind him. With a sigh, he leaned on his slender staff. It seems I am caught myself, he muttered. Seems I must answer your questions. He peered toward the stone and shook his head. I did a thing today that troubles me. He sounded almost as though he were talking to himself, trying to puzzle it out. Part of me says it was right, what I did, that I must obey. Surely it seemed right when I did it. But a small voice tells me I betrayed something. I am certain this voice is wrong, and it is very small, but it will not stop. He stopped then himself, shaking his head again. One of the Aiel nodded and spoke with the older man's voice. I am Ruach, of the 9 Valleys Sept of the Tardad Aiel. And once I was Ethan Dor, a Red Shield. Sometimes the Red Shields do as your thief catchers do. I say this so you will understand that I know what it is you do and the kind of man you must be. I mean no harm to you, Julian Sandar, of the thief catchers, nor to the people of your city, but you will not be suffered to raise the arm cry. If you will keep your silence, you will live. If not, not. You mean no harm to the city. Why are you here then? Stone. Ruark's tone made it plain that was all he had to say. After a moment, Sandar nodded and muttered. I could almost wish you had the power to harm the stone, Ruark. I will hold my tongue. Ruark turned his veiled face to Matt. And you, nameless, will you tell me now why you watch the stone so closely? I just wanted to walk in the moonlight, Matt said lightly. A young woman put her spear point to his throat. He tried not to swallow. Well, maybe I can tell them something of it. He must not let them know he was shaken. If you let the other fellow know that, you lost whatever edge you might have. Very carefully, with 2 fingers, he moved her steel away from him. It seemed to him that she laughed softly. Some friends of mine are inside the stone, he said, trying to sound casual. Prisoners. I mean to bring them out. Alone, nameless one? Ruark said. Well, there doesn't seem to be anyone else, Matt said dryly. Unless you care to help. You seem interested in the stone yourself. If you mean to go into it, perhaps we could go together. It is a tight roll of the dice any way you look at it, but my luck runs good. So far, anyway. I've run into black-veiled Aiel, and they have not cut my throat. Luck cannot get much better. Burn me, it would not be bad to have a few Aiel along with me in there. You could do worse than betting on my luck. We are not here for prisoners, gambler, Ruark said. It is time, Ruark. Matt could not tell from which of the Aiel, but Ruark nodded. Yes, go. He looked from Matt to Sandar and back. Do not give the arm cry. He turned away, and in 2 steps he had blended into the night. Matt gave a start. The other Aiel were gone too, leaving him alone with the thief-taker. Unless they left somebody to watch us. Burn me, how could I tell if they did? I hope you don't mean to try stopping me either, he told Sandar, as he slung the bundle of fireworks on his back again and picked up his quarterstaff. I mean to go inside, by you or through you, one way or the other. He went over to the chimney to pick up the tin box. The wire handle was more than warm now. These friends of yours, Sandar said. Any women? Matt frowned at him, wishing there was enough light to show the man's face clearly. The fellow's voice sounded odd. What do you know of them? I know they are inside the stone. And I know a small gate near the river where a thief-catcher can gain entrance with a prisoner to take him to the cells. The cells where they must be. If you will trust me, gambler, I can take us that far. What happens after that is up to chance. Perhaps your luck will bring us out again alive. I have always been lucky, Matt said slowly. Do I feel lucky enough to trust him? He did not much like the idea of pretending to be a prisoner. It seemed too easy for pretense to become reality. But it seemed no bigger risk than trying to climb 300 feet or more straight up in the dark. He glanced toward the city wall and stared. Shadows flowed along it, dim shapes trotting. Aiel, he was sure. There must have been over 100. They vanished, but now he could make out shadows moving on the cliff face that was the sheer side of the Stone of Tyr. So much for going up that way. That one fellow earlier might have made it inside without raising an alarm, Rourke's arm cry. But 100 or more Aiel would have to be like sounding bells. That might make a diversion, though. If they caused a commotion somewhere up there, inside the stone, then whoever was guarding the cells might not pay as much attention to a thief-taker bringing a thief. I might as well add a little to the confusion. I worked hard enough on it. Very well, thief-taker. Just don't decide I'm a real prisoner at the last minute. We can start here as soon as I stir the anthill a bit. He thought Sandar frowned, but he did not mean to tell the man more than he had to. Sandar followed him across the rooftops, climbing to higher levels as easily as he did. The last roof was only a little lower than the top of the wall, and ran right up to it, a matter of pulling himself up rather than climbing. "What are you doing?" Sandar whispered. "Wait here for me." With the tin box dangling from one hand by its wire handle, and his quarterstaff held horizontally in front of him, Matt took a deep breath and started toward the stone. He tried not to think of how far it was to the pavement below. "Light! The bloody thing is 3 feet wide. I could walk it with a bloody blindfold in my sleep." 3 feet wide, in the dark, and better than 50 feet to the pavement. He tried not to think about Sandar not being there when he came back, either. He was all but committed to this fool notion of pretending to be a thief caught by the man, but it seemed all too probable that he would return to the roof to find Sandar gone, maybe bringing more men to make him a prisoner in truth. Don't think about it. Just do the job at hand. At least I'll finally see what it is like. As he had suspected, there was an arrow slit in the wall of the stone. Right at the end of the wall, a deep wedge cut into the rock, holding a tall, narrow opening for an archer to shoot through. If the stone were attacked, the soldiers inside would want some way to stop any trying to follow this path. The slit was dark now. There did not appear to be anyone watching. That was something he had tried not to think about, too. Quickly, he set down the tin box at his feet and balanced his quarterstaff across the wall, right against the side of the stone, and unslung the bundle from his back. Hurriedly, he wedged it into the slit, forcing it in as far as he could. He wanted as much of the noise to be inside as he could manage. Pulling aside a corner of the oiled cloth cover revealed knotted fuses. After a little thinking, back in his room, he had cut the longer fuses to match the shortest, using the pieces to help tie all the fuses together. It seemed they should all go off at once, and a bang in a flash like that should be enough to pull everyone who was not completely deaf. The lid of the tin box was hot enough that he had to blow on his fingers twice before he could pry it off. Whatever Eludra's trick had been, lighting that lantern so easily, to expose the dark bit of charcoal inside, lying on a bed of sand. The wire handle came off to make tongs, and a little blowing had the coal glowing red again. He touched the hot coal to the knotted fuses, let tongs and coal fall over the side of the wall as the fuses hissed into flame, snatched up his quarterstaff, and darted back along the wall. "This is crazy," he thought as he ran. "I don't care how big a bang it makes. I could break my full neck doing this." The roar behind him was louder than anything he had ever heard in his life. A monstrous fist punched him in the back, knocking all the wind out of him even before he landed, sprawled on his belly on the wall top, barely holding on to his staff as it swung over the edge. For a moment he lay there, trying to make his lungs work again, trying not to think how he must have used up all his luck this time by not falling off the wall. His ears rang like all the bells in Tarvalin. Pushing himself up carefully, he looked back toward the stone. A cloud of smoke hung around the arrow slit. Behind the smoke, the shadowed shape of the arrow slit itself seemed different, larger. He did not understand how or why, but it did seem larger. He only thought for a moment. At one end of the wall, Sandar might be waiting, might be intending to take him into the stone as a pretend prisoner, or might be hurrying back with soldiers. At the other end of the wall, there might be a way inside without any chance of Sandar betraying him. He darted back the way he had just come, no longer worrying about the darkness or the drop to either side. The arrow slit was larger, most of the thinner stone at the middle simply gone, leaving a rough hole as if someone had hammered at it with a sledge for hours, a hole just big enough for a man. How in the light? There was no time for wondering. He pushed through the jagged opening, coughing at the acrid smoke, jumped to the floor inside, and had run a dozen steps before defenders of the stone appeared. At least 10 of them, all shouting in confusion. Most wore only their shirts, and none had helmet or breastplate. Some carried lanterns. Some held bared swords. "Fool," he shouted inside his head. "This is why you set the bloody things off in the first place. White blinded fool!" He had no time to make it back out onto the wall. Quarterstaff spinning, he threw himself at the soldiers before they had a chance to do more than see he was there. Hurled himself into them, smashing at heads, swords, knees, whatever he could reach, knowing they were too many for him to handle alone, knowing that his fool toss of the dice had cost Egwene and the others whatever chance he might have had. Suddenly Sandar was there beside him, in the light of lanterns dropped by men clawing for their swords, his slender staff whirling even faster than Matt's quarterstaff. Caught between two staffmen, taken by surprise, the soldiers went down like pins in a game of bulls. Sandar stared at the fallen men, shaking his head. "Defenders of the stone. I have attacked defenders. They all have my head for... What was it that you did, gambler? That flash of light and thunder breaking stone. Did you call lightning?" His voice fell to a whisper. "Have I joined myself to a man who can channel?" "Fireworks," Matt said curtly. His ears were still ringing, but he could hear more boots coming, running boots thudding on stone. "The cells, man! Show me the way to the cells before any more get here." Sandar shook himself. "This way." He dashed down a side hall, away from the oncoming boots. "We must hurry. They will kill us if they find us." Somewhere above, gongs began to sound an alarm, and more thundered echoes through the stone. "I'm coming," Matt thought as he ran after the thief-taker. "I'll get you out or die, I promise it." The alarm gongs sent echoes crashing through the stone, but Rand paid no more attention to them than he had to the roar that had come before, like muffled thunder from somewhere below. His side ached. The old wound burned, strained almost to tearing by the climb up the side of the fortress. He gave the pain no heed either. A crooked smile was fixed on his face, a smile of anticipation and dread he could not have wiped away if he had wanted to. It was close now. What he had dreamed of. Kalandor. "I will finish it at last. One way or another, it will be done with. The dreams finished, the baiting and the taunting and the hunting. I'll finish it all." Laughing to himself, he hurried through the dark corridors of the Stone of Tyr.
Egwene put a hand to her face, wincing. Her mouth had a bitter taste, and she was thirsty. Rand? What? Why was I dreaming about Matt again, all mixed with Rand, and shouting that he was coming? What? She opened her eyes, stared at the gray stone walls, one smoky rush torch casting flickering shadows, and screamed as she remembered it all. "No! I will not be chained again! I won't be collared! No!" Nynaeve and Elaine were beside her in an instant, their bruised faces too worried and fearful for the soothing sounds they made to be believed. But just the fact that they were there was enough to still her screams. She was not alone. A prisoner, but not alone, and not collared. She tried to sit up, and they helped her. They had to help her. She ached in every muscle. She could remember every unseen blow during the frenzy that had all but driven her mad when she realized, "I will not think about that. I have to think about how we are to escape." She slid backwards until she could lean against a wall. Her pains fought with weariness. That struggle when she had refused to give in had taken every last scrap of her strength, and the bruises seemed to sap even more. The cell was absolutely empty except for the three of them and the torch. The floor was bare and cold and hard. The door of rough planks, splintered as if countless futile fingers had clawed at it, was the only break in the walls. Messages had been scratched in the stone, most by unsteady hands. "The light have mercy and let me die," one read. She blanked that out of her head. "Are we still shielded?" she mumbled. Even talking hurt. Even as Elaine nodded, she realized she had not had to ask. The swollen cheek, on the golden-haired woman, her split lip and black eye, were answer enough, even if her own pains had not been. If Nynaeve had been able to reach the true source, they surely would have been healed. "I have tried," Nynaeve said despairingly. "I have tried and tried and tried." She gave her braid a sharp tug, anger seeping through despite the hopeless fear in her voice. "One of them is sitting outside. Amiko, that milk-faced shit, if they have not changed since we were thrown in here. I suppose one is enough to maintain the shielding once it has been woven." She barked a bitter laugh. "For all the pains they took and gave to take us, you would think we were of no importance at all. It has been hours since they slammed that door behind us, and no one has come to ask a question, or look, or even bring a drop of water. Perhaps they mean to leave us here until we die of thirst." "Wait," Elaine's voice quavered, though she was obviously trying to sound unafraid, and failing miserably. "Leandrin said we are bait." "Bait for what?" Nynaeve asked shakily. "Bait for who? If I am bait, I'd like to shove myself down their throats till they choke on me." "Rand," Egwene stopped to swallow. Even a drop of water would be welcome. "I dreamed about Rand and Kalendor. I think he is coming here. But why did I dream of Matt and Perrin? It was a wolf, but I am sure it was him." "Do not be so afraid," she said, trying to sound confident. "We will escape them somehow. If we could better the Shan-Chan, we can best Leandrin." Nynaeve and Elaine exchanged looks over her. Nynaeve said, "Leandrin said 13 Murdral are coming, Egwene." She found herself staring at that message scratched on the stone wall again. "The light have mercy and let me die." Her hands clenched into fists, her jaws cramped with the effort of not screaming those words. Better to die. Better death than being turned to the shadow, made to serve the Dark One. She realized that one of her hands had tightened around the pouch at her belt. She could feel the 2 rings inside, the small circle of the great serpent, and the larger twisted stone ring. "They did not take the Terangrial," she said wonderingly. She fumbled it out of her pouch. It lay heavily on her palm, all stripes and flecks of color, a ring with only one. "We were not even important enough to search," Elaine sighed. "Egwene, are you certain Rand is coming here? I would much rather free myself than wait for the chance of him. But if there is anyone who can defeat Leandrin and the rest of them, it must be him. The Dragon Reborn is meant to wield Kalendor. He must be able to defeat them." "Not if we pull him into a cage after us," Nynaeve muttered. "Not if they have a trap set he does not see. Why are you staring at that ring, Egwene? Tel'aran Riyadh will not help us now. Not unless you can dream a way out of here." "Perhaps I can," she said slowly. "I could channel in Tel'aran Riyadh. Their shielding won't stop me reaching it. All I need to do is sleep, not channel. And I'm surely weary enough to sleep." Elaine frowned, wincing as it pulled her bruises. "I will take any chance, but how can you channel even in a dream, cut off from the true source? And if you can, how can it help us here?" "I do not know, Elaine. Just because I am shielded here does not mean I am shielded in the world of dreams. It is at least worth a try." "Perhaps," Nynaeve said worriedly. "I will take any chance, too. But you saw Leandrin and the others the last time you used that ring. And you said they saw you, too. What if they are there again?" "I hope they are," Egwene said grimly. "I hope they are." Clutching the Terangrial in her hand, she closed her eyes. She could feel Elaine smoothing her hair, hear her murmuring softly. Nynaeve began to hum that wordless lullaby from her childhood. For once she felt no anger at it at all. The soft sounds and touches soothed her, let her surrender to her weariness, let sleep come. She wore blue silk this time, but she barely noticed more than that. Soft breezes caressed her unbruised face and sent the butterflies swirling above the wildflowers. Her thirst was gone, her aches. She reached out to embrace Saidar and was filled with the one power. Even the triumph she felt at succeeding was small beside the surging of the power through her. Reluctantly, she made herself release it, closed her eyes, and filled the emptiness with a perfect image of the heart of the stone. That was the one place in the stone she could picture aside from her cell, and how to distinguish one featureless cubicle from another. When she opened her eyes, she was there, but she was not alone. The form of Joya Bier stood before Kalendor, her shape so insubstantial that the surging light of the sword shone through her. The crystal sword no longer merely glittered with refracted light. In pulses it glowed, as if some light inside it were being uncovered, then covered, and uncovered again. The Black Sister started with surprise and spun to face Egwene. "How? You are shielded. Your dreaming is at an end." Before the first words were out of the woman's mouth, Egwene reached for Saidar again, wove the complicated flow of spirit as she remembered it being used against her, and cut Joya Bier off from the source. The dark friend's eyes widened, those cruel eyes so incongruous in that beautiful, kindly face. But Egwene was already weaving air. The other woman's form might seem like mist, but the bonds held it. It seemed to Egwene that there was no effort involved in holding both flows in their weaving. There was sweat on Joya Bier's forehead as she walked closer. "You have a Tarangri." Fear was plain on the woman's face, but her voice fought to hide it. "That must be it. A Tarangrial that escaped us, and one that does not require channeling. Do you think it will do you any good, girl? Whatever you do here, it cannot affect what happens in the real world. Tel Iran Riyadh is a dream. When I wake, I will take your Tarangrial from you myself. Be careful what you do, lest I have reason to be angry when I come to your cell." Egwene smiled at her. "Are you certain you will wake, dark friend? If your Tarangrial requires channeling, why did you not wake as soon as I shielded you? Perhaps you cannot wake so long as you are shielded here." Her smile faded away. The effort of smiling at this woman was more than she could bear. "A woman once showed me a scar she received in Tel Iran Riyadh, dark friend. What happens here is still real when you wake." The sweat rolled down the Black Sister's smooth, ageless face now. Egwene wondered if she thought she was about to die. She almost wished she were cruel enough to do that. Most of the unseen blows she had received had come from this woman, like a pounding of fists, for no reason more than that she had kept trying to crawl away, no reason more than that she had refused to give up. "A woman who can give such beatings," she said, "should have no objections to a milder one." She wove another flow of air quickly. Joya Bier's dark eyes bulged in disbelief as the first blow landed across her hip. Egwene saw how to adjust the weaving so she did not have to maintain it. "You will remember this and feel it when you waken, when I allow you to waken. Remember this, too. If you ever even try to beat me again, I will return you here and leave you for the rest of your life." The Black Sister's eyes stared hate at her, but there was a suggestion of tears in them, too. Egwene felt a moment of shame. Not at what she was doing to Joya. The woman deserved every blow, if not for her own beating, then for the deaths in the tower. Not that, not really, but because she had spent time on her own revenge while Nynaeve and Elaine were sitting in a cell, hoping against hope that she might be able to rescue them. She tied off and set the flows of her weavings before she knew she had done it, then paused to study what she had done. 3 separate weavings, and not only had it been no trouble to hold them all at once, but now she had done something so they would maintain themselves. She thought she could remember how, too, and it might be useful. After a moment she unraveled one of the weavings, and the dark friend sobbed as much from relief as from pain. "I am not like you," Egwene said. "This is the second time I have done something like this, and I do not like it. I'm going to have to learn to cut throats instead. From the Black Sister's face, she thought Egwene meant to start learning with her. Making a disgusted sound, Egwene left her standing there, trapped and shielded, and hurried into the forest of polished redstone columns. There had to be a way down to the cells somewhere.
The stone corridor fell silent as the final dying scream was cut off by young Bull's jaws closing on the two legs' throat, crushing it. The blood was bitter on his tongue. He knew this was the Stone of Tyr, though he could not say how he knew. The two legs lying around him, one kicking his last with Hopper's teeth buried in his throat, had smelled rank with fear as they fought. They had smelled confused. He did not think they had known where they were. They certainly did not belong in the wolf dream, but they had been set to keep him from that tall door ahead with its iron lock. To guard it, at least. They had seemed startled to see wolves. He thought they had been startled at being there themselves. He wiped his mouth, then stared at his hand with a momentary lack of comprehension. He was a man again. He was Perrin. Back in his own body, in the blacksmith's vest, with the heavy hammer at his side. "We must hurry, young Bull. There is something evil near." Perrin pulled the hammer from his belt as he strode to the door. Aiel must be here. One sharp blow shattered the lock. He kicked open the door. The room was empty except for a long stone block in the middle of the floor. Aiel lay on that block as if sleeping, her black hair spread out like a fan, her body so wrapped in chains that it took him a moment to realize she was unclothed. Every chain was held to the stone by a thick bolt. He was hardly aware of crossing the space until his hand touched her, tracing her cheekbone with a finger. She opened her eyes and smiled up at him. "I kept dreaming you would come, blacksmith." "I will have you free in a moment, Aiel." He raised his hammer, smashed one of the bolts as if it were wood. "I was sure of it, Perrin." As his name faded from her tongue, she faded too. With a clatter, the chains dropped to the stone where she had been. "No!" he cried. "I found her!" "The dream is not like the world of flesh, young Bull. Here, the same hunt can have many endings." He did not turn to look at Hopper. He knew his teeth were bared in a snarl. Again he raised the hammer, brought it down with all his strength against the chains that had held Aiel. The stone block cracked in two under his blow. The stone itself rang like a struck bell. "Then I will hunt again," he growled. Hammer in hand, Perrin strode out of the room with Hopper beside him. The stone was a place of men, and men, he knew, were crueler hunters than ever wolves were. Alarm gongs somewhere above sent sonorous clangs down the corridor, not quite drowning out the ring of metal on metal and the shouts of fighting men rather closer. The Aiel and the defenders, Matt suspected. Tall golden lampstands, each with 4 golden lamps, lined the hall where Matt was.
Give me 1 second.
On the floor, dark red on dark blue, woven in a Tyran maze. For once, Matt was too busy to put a price on anything. "This bloody fellow is good," he thought, as he managed to sweep a sword thrust away from him. But the blow he aimed at the man's head with the other end of the staff had to turn into another block of that darting blade. I wonder if he is one of these bloody High Lords. He also managed a solid blow at a knee, but his opponent sprang back, his straight blade raised on guard. The blue-eyed man certainly wore the puffy-sleeved coat, yellow with thread of gold stripes, but it was all undone, his shirt only half tucked into his breeches, and his feet bare. His short-cropped dark hair was tousled like that of a man roused hastily from sleep. But he did not fight like it. 5 minutes ago, he had come darting out from one of the tall carved doors that lined this hall, a scabbardless sword in his hands. And Matt was only grateful the fellow had appeared in front of them and not behind. He was not the first man dressed so that Matt had faced already, but he was surely the best. "Can you make it past me, thief catcher?" Matt called, careful not to take his eyes off the man waiting for him with blade poised to strike. Sandar had insisted irritably on thief catcher, not thief taker, though Matt could not see any difference. "I cannot," Sandar called from behind him. "If you move to let me by, you will lose room to swing that oar you call a staff, and he will spit you like a grunt." "Like a what?" "Well, think of something, tyrant. This ragamuffin is grating my nerves." The man in the gold-striped coat sneered. "You will be honored to die on the blade of the High Lord Darlin, peasant, if I allow it so." It was the first time he had deigned to speak. "Instead, I think I will have the pair of you hung by the heels, and watch while the skin is stripped from your bodies." "I don't think I'd like that," Matt said. The High Lord's face reddened with indignation at being interrupted, but Matt gave him no time for any outraged comment. Quarterstaff whirling in a tight double-loop weave, so quick the staff blurred at the ends, he leaped forward. It was all the snarling Darlin could do to keep the staff from him. For the moment. Matt knew he could not keep this up very long, and if he was lucky then, it would all go back to the strike and counter-strike. If he was lucky. But he had no intention of counting on luck this time. As soon as the High Lord had a moment to set himself in a pattern of defense, Matt altered his attack in mid-whirl. The end of the staff Darlin had been expecting at his head dipped instead to sweep his legs out from under him. The other end did strike at his head then, as he fell, a sharp crack that rolled his eyes back up in his head. Panting, Matt leaned on his staff over the unconscious High Lord. "Burn me if I have to fight one or two more like this. I'll bloody well fall over from exhaustion. The stories do not tell you being a hero is such hard work. Nynaeve always did find a way to make me work." Sandar came to stand beside him, frowning down at the crumpled High Lord. "He does not look so mighty lying there. He does not look so much greater than me." Matt gave a start and peered down the hall, where a man had just gone trotting across along a joining corridor. "Burn me. If I did not know it was crazy, I would swear that was right." He began swinging onto his shoulder and was cut off when he spinning, he found himself facing a High Lord, this one with his sword on the floor, his knees buckling, and both hands to his head, where Matt's staff had split his scalp. Hastily, Matt poked him hard in the stomach with the butt of the staff to bring his hands down, then gave him another thump on the head to put him down in a heap on top of his sword. "Lucky, Sandar," he muttered. "You cannot beat bloody luck. Now, why don't you find this bloody private way the High Lords take down to the cells?" Sandar had insisted there was such a stairway, and using it would avoid having to run through most of the stone. Matt did not think he liked men so eager to answer the question that they wanted a quick route to their opponents. "Just be glad you were so lucky," he said unsteadily. "For this one would have killed us both before we saw him. I know the door is here somewhere. Are you coming? Or do you mean to wait for another High Lord to appear?" "Lead on." Matt stepped over the unconscious High Lord. "I'm no bloody hero." Trotting, he followed the thief catcher, who peered at the tall doors they passed, muttering that he knew it was here somewhere. Chapter 55. What is written in prophecy. Rand entered the chamber slowly, walking among the great polished red stone columns he remembered from his dreams. Silence filled the shadows, yet something called to him, and something flashed ahead. Momentary light throwing back shadow, a beacon. He stepped out beneath the great dome and saw what he sought. Kalandor, hanging hilt down in midair, waiting for no hand but that of the Dragon Reborn. As it revolved, it broke what little light there was into splinters. Now and then it flared as if with a light of its own, calling him, waiting for him. If I am the Dragon Reborn, if I am not just some half-mad man cursed with the ability to channel a puppet dancing for Moraine in the White Tower. Take it, Luz Theron. Take it, Kinslayer. He spun to face the voice. The tall man with close-cropped white hair, who stepped from the shadows among the columns, was familiar to him. Rand had no idea who he was, this fellow in a red silk coat with black stripes down its puffy sleeves and black breeches tucked into elaborately silver-worked boots. He did not know the man, but he had seen him in his dreams. You put them in a cage, he said. Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine. In my dreams. You kept putting them in a cage and hurting them. The man made a dismissive gesture of his hand. They are less than nothing. Perhaps one day when they have been trained, but not now. I confess surprise that you cared enough to make them useful. But you were ever a fool, ever ready to follow your heart before power. You came too soon, Luz Theron. Now you must do what you are not yet ready for, or else die. Die knowing you have left these women you care for in my hands. He seemed to be waiting for something, expectant. I mean to use them more, Kinslayer. They will serve me, serve my power. And that will hurt them far more than anything they have suffered before. Behind Rand, Kalendor flashed, throwing one pulse of warmth against his back. Who are you? You do not remember me, do you? The white-haired man laughed suddenly. I do not remember you either, looking this way. A country lad with a flute case on his back. Did Ishamael speak the truth? He was ever one to lie when it gained him an inch or a second. Do you remember nothing, Luz Theron? A name, Rand demanded. What is your name? Call me Belal. The Forsaken scowled when Rand did not react to the name. Take it, Belal snapped, throwing a hand toward the sword behind Rand. Once we rode to war side by side. And for that I give you a chance. A bad chance, but a chance to save yourself. A chance to save those three I mean to make my pets. Take the sword, countryman. Perhaps it will be enough to help you survive me. Rand laughed. Do you believe you can frighten me so easily, Forsaken? Baalzamon himself has hunted me. Do you think I will cower now for you? Grovel before a Forsaken when I have denied the Dark One to his face? Is that what you think? Belal said softly. Truly you know nothing. Suddenly there was a sword in his hands. A sword with a blade carved from black fire. Take it! Take Kalendor! 3,000 years while I lay imprisoned, it has waited there. For you. One of the most powerful sangreal we ever made. Take it, and defend yourself, if you can. He moved toward Rand as if to drive him back toward Kalendor. But Rand raised his own hands. Saladin filled him. Sweet, rushing flow of the power, stomach-wrenching vileness of the taint. And he held a sword wrought from red flame, a sword with a heron mark on its fiery blade. He stepped into the forms Lan had taught him, till he flowed from one to the next as if in a dance. Parting the silk, water flows downhill, wind and rain. Blade of black fire met blade of red in showers of sparks, roars like white-hot metal shattering. Rand came back smoothly into a guard stance, trying not to let his sudden uncertainty show. A heron stood on the black blade, too, a bird so dark as to be nearly invisible. Once he had faced a man with a heron-marked blade of steel, and barely survived. He knew that he himself had no real right to the Blade Master's mark. It had been on the sword his father had given him. And when he thought of a sword in his hands, he thought of that sword. Once he had embraced death, as the warder had taught, but this time, he knew, his death would be final. Belal was better than he with the sword, stronger, faster, a true Blade Master. He laughed, amused, swinging his blade in quick flourishes to either side of him. The black fire roared as if swift passage through the air quickened it. "You were a greater swordsman once, Luz Theron," he said mockingly. "Do you remember when we took that tame sport called swords and learned to kill with it, as the old volumes said men once had? Do you remember even one of those desperate battles, even one of our dire defeats? Of course not. You remember nothing, do you? This time you have not learned enough. This time, Luz Theron, I will kill you." Bilal's mockery deepened. "Perhaps if you take Calendar, you might extend your life a little longer. A little longer." He came forward slowly, almost as if to give Rand time to do just that. Turn and race to Calendar, to the sword that cannot be touched, to take it. But the doubts were still strong in Rand. Calendar could only be touched by the Dragon Reborn. He had allowed them to proclaim him so for 100 reasons that seemed to leave him no choice at the time. But was he truly the Dragon Reborn? If he raced to touch Calendar in truth, not in a dream, would his hand meet an invisible wall, or Bilal cut him down from behind? He met the Forsaken with the sword he knew, the blade of fire wrought from Zidine, and was driven back. The falling leaf met watered silk. The cat dances on the wall met the boar rushes downhill. The river undercuts the bank, nearly lost him his head, and he had to throw himself inelegantly to one side with black flame brushing his hair, rolling to his feet to confront the stone falls from the mountain. Methodically, deliberately, Bilal drove him back in a spiral that slowly tightened on Calendar. Shouts echoed among the columns, screams, the clash of steel, but Rand barely heard. He and Bilal were no longer alone in the heart of the stone. Men in breastplates and rimmed helmets fought with swords against shadowy, veiled shapes that darted among the columns with short spears stabbing. Some of the soldiers formed a rank. Arrows flashing out of the dimness took them in the throat, the face, and they died in their line. Rand hardly noticed the fighting, even when men fell dead within paces of him. His own fight was too desperate. It took all of his concentration. Wet warmth trickled down his side. The old wound was breaking open. He stumbled suddenly, not seeing the dead man at his feet until he was lying on his back atop his flute case on the stone floor. Bilal raised his blade of black fire, snarling, "Take it! Take Calendar and defend yourself! Take it or I will kill you now! If you will not take it, I will slay you!" "No!" Even Bilal gave a start at the command in that woman's voice. The Forsaken stepped back out of the arc of Rand's sword and turned his head to frown at Moraine as she came striding through the battle, her eyes fixed on him, ignoring the screaming deaths around her. "I thought you were neatly out of the way, woman. No matter. You are only an annoyance, a stinging fly, a bite me. I will cage you with the others and teach you to serve the shadow with your puny powers." He finished with a contemptuous laugh and raised his free hand. Moraine had not stopped or slowed while he spoke. She was no more than 30 paces from him when he moved his hand, and she raised both of hers as well. There was an instant of surprise on the Forsaken's face, and he had time to scream, "No!" Then a bar of white flame, hotter than the sun, shot from the Aes Sedai's hands, a glaring rod that banished all shadows. Before it, Bilal became a shape of shimmering motes, specks dancing in the light for less than a heartbeat, flecks consumed before his cry faded. There was silence in the chamber as that bar of light vanished. Silence except for the moans of the wounded. The fighting had stopped dead. Veiled men and men in breastplates alike standing as if stunned. "He was right concerning one thing," Moraine said, as coolly serene as if she were standing in a meadow. "You must take Calendar. He meant to slay you for it, but it is your birthright. Better by far that you knew more before your hand held that hilt. Yet you have come to the point now, and there's no further time for learning. Take it, Rand." Whips of black lightning curled around her. She screamed as they lifted her, hurled it to slide along the floor like a sack until she came up against one of the columns. Rand stared up at where the lightning had come from. There was a deeper shadow up there, near the top of the columns. a blackness that made all other shadows look like noonday, and from it, 2 eyes of fire stared back at him. Slowly the shadow descended, resolving into Baalzamon, clothed in dead black, like a Murdrol's black. Yet even that was not so dark as the shadow that clung to him. He hung in the air, 2 spans above the floor, glaring at Rand with a rage as fierce as his eyes. Twice in this life I have offered you the chance to serve me living. Flames leaped in his mouth as he spoke, and every word roared like a furnace. Twice you have refused and wounded me. Now you will serve the Lord of the Grave in death. Die, Luce Theron Kinslayer. Die, Rand al'Thor. It is time for you to die. I take your soul. As Baalzamon put forth his hand, Rand pushed himself up, threw himself desperately toward Kalendor, still glittering and flashing in midair. He did not know whether he could reach it or touch it if he did, but he was sure it was his only chance. Baalzamon's blow struck him as he leapt, struck inside him, a ripping and crumpling, tearing something loose, trying to pull a part of him away. Rand screamed. He felt as if he were collapsing like an empty sack, as if he were being turned inside out. The pain in his side, the wound taken at Falma, was almost welcome, something to hang on to, a reminder of life. His hand closed convulsively on Kalendor's hilt. The one power surged through him, a torrent greater than he could believe, from Sayadine into the sword. The crystal blade shone brighter than even Moraine's fire had. It was impossible to look at, impossible any longer to see that it was a sword. Only that light blazed in his fist. He fought the flow, wrestled with the implacable tide that threatened to carry him, all that was really him, into the sword with it. For a heartbeat that took centuries, he hung, wavering, balanced on the brink of being scoured away like sand before a flash flood. With infinite slowness, the balance firmed. It was still as though he stood barefoot on a razor's edge above a bottomless drop. Yet something told him this was the best that could be expected. To channel this much of the power, he must dance on that sharpness, as he had danced the forms of the sword. He turned to face Baalzamon. The tearing within him had ceased as soon as his hand touched Kalendor. Only an instant had passed, yet it seemed to have lasted forever. "You will not take my soul," he shouted. "This time, I mean to finish it once and for all. I mean to finish it now." Baalzamon fled, man and shadow vanishing. For a moment, Rand stared, frowning. There had been a sense of folding as Baalzamon left. A twisting, as if Baalzamon had in some way bent what was. Ignoring the men staring at him, ignoring Moraine crumpled at the column base, Rand reached out, through Kalendor, and twisted reality to make a door to somewhere else. He did not know to where, except that it was where Baalzamon had gone. "I am the hunter now," he said, and stepped through.
The stone shook under Egwene's feet. The stone shook. It rang. She caught her balance and stopped, listening. There was no more sound, no other tremor. Whatever had happened, it was over. She hurried on. A door of iron bars stood in her way with a lock as big as her head. She channeled earth before she reached it, and when she pushed against the bars, the lock tore in half. She walked quickly across the chamber beyond it, trying not to look at the things hanging on the walls. Whips and iron pincers were the most innocuous. With a small shutter, she pushed open a smaller iron gate and entered a corridor lined with rough wooden doors, rush torches burning at intervals in iron brackets. She felt almost as much relief at leaving those things behind as she did at finding what she sought. But which cell? The wooden doors opened easily. Some were unlocked, and the locks on the others lasted no longer than that larger lock had earlier. But every cell was empty. Of course. No one would dream themselves in this place. Any prisoner who managed to reach Tel Run would dream of a pleasanter place. For a moment she felt something close to despair. She had wanted to believe that finding the right cell would make a difference. Even finding it could be impossible, though. This first corridor stretched on, and others joined it. Suddenly she saw something flicker just ahead of her, a shape even less substantial than Joya Bier had been. It had been a woman, though, she was sure of that. A woman seated on a bench beside one of the cell doors. The image flickered into being again and was gone. There was no mistaking that slender neck and the pale, innocent-appearing face with its eyelids fluttering on the edge of sleep. Amiko Nagoyan was drifting toward sleep, dreaming of her guard duties, and apparently toying drowsily with one of the stolen Terangrial. Egwene could understand that. It had been a great effort to stop using the one Varen had given her, even for a few days. She knew it was possible to cut a woman off from the true source, even if she had already embraced Saidar, but severing a weave already established had to be much harder than damming the flow before it began. She set the patterns of the weaving, readied them, making the threads of spirit much stronger this time, thicker and heavier, a denser weave with a cutting edge like a knife. The wavering shape of the dark friend appeared again, and Egwene struck out with the flows of air and spirit. For an instant something seemed to resist the weaving of spirit, and she forced it with all of her might. It slid into place. Amiko Nagoyan screamed. It was a thin sound, barely heard, as faint as she herself was, and she seemed almost like a shadow of what Joya Bier had been. Yet the bonds woven of air held her. She did not vanish again. Terror twisted the dark friend's lovely face. She seemed to be babbling, but her shouts were whispers too soft for Egwene to understand. Tying and setting the weaves around the Black Sister, Egwene turned her attentions to the cell door. Impatiently, she let earth flood into the iron lock. It fell away in black dust, in a mist that dissolved completely before it struck the floor. She swung open the door, and was not surprised to find the cell empty except for one burning rush torch. But Amiko is bound, and the door is open. For a moment she thought of what to do next. Then she stepped out of the dream, and woke to all her bruises and aches and thirst, to the wall of the cell against her back, staring at the tightly shut cell door. Of course, what happens to living things there is real when they wake. What I did to stone or iron or wood has no effect in the waking world. Nynaeve and Elaine were still kneeling beside her. Whoever is out there, Nynaeve said, screamed a few moments ago, but nothing else has happened. Did you find a way out? We should be able to walk out, Egwene said. Help me to my feet and I will get rid of the lock. Amiko will not trouble us. That scream was her. Elaine shook her head. I've been trying to embrace Saidar ever since you left. It is different now, but I'm still cut off. Egwene formed the emptiness inside her, became the rosebud opening to Saidar. The invisible wall was still there. It shimmered now. There were moments when she almost thought she could feel the true source beginning to fill her with the power. Almost. The shield wavered in and out of existence too fast for her to detect. It might as well have been solid. She stared at the other two women. I bound her. I shielded her. She is a living thing, not lifeless iron. She must be shielded still. Something has happened to the shield set on us, Elaine
Give me a
said.
sec, I'll be right
But
back.
Amiko is still managing to hold it. Egwene let her head sag back against the wall. I will have to try again. Are you strong enough? Elaine grimaced. To be blunt, you sound even weaker than you did before. This try took something out of you, Egwene. I am strong enough there. She did feel more weary, less strong, but it was their only chance that she could see. She said as much, and their faces said they agreed with her, however reluctantly. Can you go to sleep again so soon? Nynaeve asked finally. Sing to me. Egwene managed to smile. Like when I was a little girl, please? Holding Nynaeve's hand with one of hers, the stone ring clasped in the other, she closed her eyes and tried to find sleep in the wordless humming tune.
The wide door of iron bars stood open. The room beyond seemed empty of life. Matt entered cautiously. Sandar was still out in the hall, trying to peer both ways at once, certain that a High Lord, or maybe 100 defenders or so, would appear at any moment. There were no men in the room now, and by the looks of the half-eaten meals on a long table, they had left hurriedly, no doubt because of the fighting above. And from the looks of the things on the walls, he was just as glad he did not have to meet any of them. Whips in different sizes and lengths, different thicknesses, with different numbers of tails. Pincers and tongs and clamps and irons. Things that looked like metal boots and gauntlets and helmets, with great screws all over them as if to tighten them down. Things he could not even begin to guess the use of. If he had met the men who used these things, he thought he would surely have checked that they were dead before he walked away. "Sandar," he hissed, "are you going to stay out there all bloody night?" He hurried to the inner door, barred like the outer, but smaller, without waiting for an answer, and went through. The hall beyond was lined by rough wooden doors and lit by the same rush torches as the room he had just left. No more than 20 paces from him, a woman sat on a bench beside one of the doors, leaning back against the wall in a curiously stiff fashion. She turned her head slowly toward him at the sound of his boots grating on the stone. A pretty young woman. He wondered why she did not move more than her head, and why even that moved as if she were half asleep. Was she a prisoner? Out in the hall? But nobody with a face like that can be one of the people who uses the things on those walls. She did look almost asleep, with her eyes only partly open, and the suffering on that lovely face surely made her one of the tortured, not a torturer. "Stop!" Sandar shouted behind him. "She is Aes Sedai, one of those who took the women you seek." Matt froze in the middle of a step, staring at the woman. He remembered Moraine hurling balls of fire. He wondered if he could deflect a ball of fire with his quarterstaff. He wondered if his luck extended to outrunning Aes Sedai. "Help me," she said faintly. Her eyes still looked nearly asleep, but the pleading in her voice was fully awake. "Help me, please." Matt blinked. She still had not moved a muscle below her neck. Cautiously, he stepped closer, waving to Sandar to stop his groaning about her being Aes Sedai. She moved her head to follow him, no more than that. A large iron key hung at her belt. For a moment he hesitated. "Aes Sedai," Sandar said. "Why doesn't she move?" Swallowing, he eased the key free as carefully as if he were trying to take a piece of meat from a wolf's jaws. She rolled her eyes toward the door beside her and made a sound like a cat that had just seen a huge dog come snarling into the room and knew there was no way out. He did not understand it, but as long as she did not try to stop him opening that door, he did not care why she just sat there like a stuffed scarecrow. On the other hand, he wondered if there was something on the other side worth being afraid of. If she is one of those who took Egwene and the others, it stands to reason she's guarding them. Tears leaked from the woman's eyes. Only she looks like it's a bloody half-man in there. But there was only one way to find out. Propping his staff against the wall, he turned the key in the lock and flung open the door, ready to run if need be. Nynaeve and Elaine were kneeling on the floor with Egwene apparently asleep between them. He gasped at the sight of Egwene's swollen face and changed his mind about her sleeping. The other two women turned toward him as he opened the door. They were almost as battered as Egwene. "Burn me, burn me," looked at him and gaped. "Matrim Cawthon," Nynaeve said, sounding shocked. "What under the light are you doing here?" "I came to bloody rescue you," he said. "Burn me if I expected to be greeted as if I had come to steal a pie. You can tell me why you look as if you've been fighting bears later if you want. If Egwene cannot walk, I'll carry her on my back. There are Aiel all over the stone, or near enough, and either they are killing the bloody defenders or the bloody defenders are killing them. But whichever way it is, we had better get out of here while we bloody well can. If we can." "Mind your language," Nynaeve told him, and Elaine gave him one of those disapproving stares women were so good at. Neither one seemed to have her full attention in it, though. They began shaking Egwene as if she were not covered with more bruises than he had ever seen in his life. Egwene's eyelids fluttered open, and she groaned. "Why did you wake me? I must understand it. If I loose the bonds on her, she will wake and I'll never catch her again. But if I do not, she cannot go all the way to sleep, and—" Her eyes fell on him and widened. "Matrim Cawthon, what under the light are you doing here?" "You tell her," he told Nynaeve. "I'm too busy trying to rescue you to watch my leg." They were all staring beyond him, glaring as if they wished they had knives in their hands. He spun, but all he saw was Jewel and Sandar, looking as if he had swallowed a rotten plum whole. They have cause, he told Matt. I betrayed them, but I had to. This was addressed past Matt to the women. The one with the many honey-colored braids spoke to me, and I had to do it. For a long moment, the three continued to stare. Leandrin has vile tricks, Master Sandar, Nynaeve said finally. Perhaps you're not entirely to blame. You can apportion guilt later. If that is all cleared up, Matt said, can we go now? It was as clear as mud to him, but he was more interested in leaving right then. The three women limped after him into the hall, but they stopped around the woman on the bench. She rolled her eyes at them and whimpered. Please, I will come back to the light. I will swear to obey you. With the oath rod in my hands, I will swear. Please do not. Matt jumped as Nynaeve suddenly reared back and swung a fist, knocking the woman completely off the bench. She lay there, her eyes closed all the way finally, but even lying on her side, she was still in exactly the same position she had been in on the bench. It is gone, Elaine said excitedly. Egwene bent to rummage in the unconscious woman's pouch, transferring something Matt could not make out to her own. Yes, it feels wonderful. Something changed about her when you hit her, Nynaeve. I do not know what, but I felt it. Elaine nodded. I felt it too. I would like to change every last thing about her, Nynaeve said grimly. She took Egwene's head in her hands. Egwene rose onto her toes, gasping. When Nynaeve took her hands away to put them on Elaine, Egwene's bruises were gone. Elaine's vanished as quickly. Blood and bloody ashes, Matt growled. What do you mean, hitting a woman who was just sitting there? I don't think she could even move. They all three turned to look at him, and he made a strangled sound as the air seemed to turn to thick jelly around him. He lifted into the air until his boots dangled a good pace above the floor. Oh, burn me, the power. Here I was afraid that Aes Sedai would use the bloody power on me, and now the bloody women I'm rescuing do it. Burn me. You do not understand anything, Matron Cawthon, Egwene said in a tight voice. Until you do understand, Nynaeve said in an even tighter, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself. Elaine contented herself with a glare that made him think of his mother going out to cut a switch. For some reason, he found himself giving them the grin that had so often sent his mother after that switch. Burn me. If they can do this, I don't see how anybody ever locked them in that cell in the first place. What I understand is that I got you out of something you couldn't get yourselves out of, and you all have as much gratitude as a bloody Tauren ferryman with a toothache. You are right, Nynaeve said, and then his boots suddenly hit the floor so hard his teeth jarred. But he could move again. As much as it pains me to say it, Matt, you are right. He was tempted to answer something sarcastic, but there was barely enough apology in her voice as it was. Now can we go? With the fighting going on, Sandar thinks he and I can take you out by a small gate near the river. I am not leaving just yet, Matt, Nynaeve said. I mean to find Leandrin and Skinner, Egwene said, sounding almost as if she meant it literally. All I want to do, Elaine said, is pound Joya Bayer till she squeals, but I will settle for any of them. Are you all deaf? He growled. There is a battle going on out there. I came here to rescue you, and I mean to rescue you. Egwene patted his cheek as she walked by him and studied Elaine. Nynaeve merely sniffed. He stared after them with his mouth hanging open. Why didn't you say something? He growled at the thief catcher. I saw what speaking earned you, Sandar said simply. I am no fool. Well, I'm not staying in the middle of a battle, he shouted at the women. They were just disappearing through the small barred door. I am leaving, do you hear? They did not even look back. Probably get themselves killed out there. Somebody will stick a sword in them while they are looking the other way. With a snarl, he put his quarterstaff across his shoulder and started after. Are you going to stand there? He called to the thief catcher.
No, what the
I
hell?
did not come this far to let them die now.
Never mind.
Sandar caught up to him in the room with the whips. The three women were already gone. But Matt had a feeling they would not be too hard to find. Just find the men bloody hanging in midair. Bloody women. He quickened his pace to a trot. Perrin strode down the halls of the stone grimly, searching for some sign of Fail. He had rescued her twice more now, breaking her out of an iron cage once, much like the one that held the Aiel and Remen, and once breaking open a steel chest with a falcon worked on its side. Both times she had melted into air after saying his name. Hopper trotted by his side, sniffing the air. As sharp as Perrin's nose was, the wolf's was sharper. It had been Hopper who led them to the chest. Perrin wondered whether he was ever going to free her in truth. There had not been any sign in a long time, it seemed. The halls of the stone were empty, lamps burning, tapestries and weapons hanging on the walls, but nothing moved except himself and Hopper. Except I think that was Rand. It had only been a glimpse, a man running as if chasing someone. It could not be him. It couldn't. I think it was. Hopper quickened his steps suddenly, heading for another set of tall doors, these clad in bronze. Perrin tried to reach his pace, stumbled, and fell to his knees, throwing out a hand to catch himself short of dropping on his face. Weakness washed through him as if all his muscles had gone to water. Even after the feeling receded, it took some of his strength with it. It was an effort to struggle to his feet. Hopper turned to look at him. "You are here too strongly, young bull. The flesh weakens. You do not care to hold on to it enough. Soon flesh and dream will die together." "Find her," Perrin said. "That is all I ask. Find Fail." Yellow eyes met yellow eyes. The wolf turned and trotted to the doors. "Beyond here, young bull." Perrin reached the doors and pushed. They did not budge. There seemed to be no way to open them, no handles, nothing to grip. There was a tiny pattern worked into the metal, so fine his eyes almost did not see it. Falcons. Thousands of tiny falcons. She has to be here. I do not think I can last much longer. With a shout, he swung his hammer against the bronze. It rang like a great gong. Again he struck, and the peal deepened. A third blow, and the bronze doors shattered like glass. Within, 100 paces from the broken doors, a circle of light surrounded the falcon chained to the perch. Darkness filled all the rest of that vast chamber. Darkness and faint rustlings as of hundreds of wings. He took a step into the room. The falcon swooped out of the murk, talons scoring his face as it passed. He threw an arm across his eyes. Talons tore his forearm, and staggered toward the perch. Again and again the birds came, falcons diving, striking him, tearing him. But he lumbered on with blood pouring down his arms and shoulders. That one arm protecting the eyes he had fixed on the falcon on the perch. He had lost the hammer, he did not know where, but he knew that if he went back to search, he would die before he found it. As he reached the perch, the slicing talons drove him to his knees. He peered up under his arm at the falcon on the perch, and she stared back with dark, unblinking eyes. The chain that held her leg was fastened to the perch with a tiny lock shaped like a hedgehog. He seized the chain with both hands, careless of the other falcons that now became a whirlwind of cutting talons around him, and with his last strength snapped it. Pain and the falcons brought darkness. He opened his eyes to stinging agony, as if his face and arms and shoulders had been sliced with 1,000 knives. It did not matter. Fail was kneeling over him, those dark, tilted eyes filled with worry, wiping his face with a cloth already soaked in his blood. "My poor Perrin," she said softly. "My poor blacksmith. You were hurt so badly." With an effort that caused more pain, he turned his head. This was the private dining room in the Star, and near one leg of the table lay a wooden carving of a hedgehog, broken in half. "Fail," he whispered to her. "My falcon." Rand was still in the heart of the stone, but it was different. There were no men fighting here, no dead men, no one at all but himself. Abruptly, the sound of a great gong rang through the stone, then again, and the very stones beneath his feet resonated. A third time the booming came, but cut off abruptly, as if the gong had shattered. All was still. Where is this place, he wondered. More important, where is Baal-Zaman? As if to answer him, a blazing shaft like the one Moraine had made shot out of the shadows among the columns, straight toward his chest. His wrist twisted the sword instinctively. It was instinct as much as anything else that made him loose flows from Saidin into Kalendor. A flood of the power that made the sword blaze brighter even than that bar streaking at him. His uncertain balance between existence and destruction wavered. Surely that torrent would consume him. The shaft of light struck the blade of Kalendor. It parted on its edge, forking to stream past on either side. He felt his coat singe from its near passage, smelled the wool beginning to burn. Behind him, the two prongs of frozen fire, of liquid light, struck huge redstone columns. Where they struck, stone ceased to exist, and the burning bars bored through to other columns, serving those instantaneously as well. The heart of the stone rumbled as columns fell and shattered in clouds of dust, sprays of stone fragments. What fell into the light, however, simply was not anymore. A snarl of rage came from the shadows, and the blazing shaft of pure white heat vanished. Rand swung Kalendor as if he were striking at something in front of him. The white light obscuring the blade extended, blazed ahead, and sheared through the redstone column that hid the snarl. The polished stone sliced like silk. The severed column trembled. Part of it tore loose and dropped from the ceiling, smashing into huge, jagged chunks on the floor. As the rumbling faded, we heard beyond it the sound of boots on stone. Running. Kalendor at the ready, Rand hurried after Baalzaman. The tall archway leading out of the heart collapsed as he reached it, the entire wall falling into clouds of dust and rock, as if to bury him. But he threw the power at it, and all became dust floating in the air. He ran on. He was not sure what he had done, or how, but he had no time to think on it. He ran after Baalzaman's retreating footsteps, echoing down the halls of the stone. Myrddraal and Trollocs leaped out of thin air, huge bestial shapes and eyeless faces distorted with a rage to kill, in hundreds. So they jammed the hall before him and behind, scythe-like swords and blades of deadly black steel seeking his blood. Without knowing how, he turned them to vapor that parted before him and vanished. The air around him suddenly became choking soot, clogging his nostrils, shutting off breath. But he made it fresh air again, a cool mist. Flames leaped from the floor beneath his feet, spurted from the walls, the ceiling, furious jets that flashed tapestries and rugs, tables and chests, to wisps of ash, flung ornaments and lamps ahead of them as drops of molten burning gold. He smashed the fires flat, hardened them into a red glaze on the rock. The stones around him faded almost to mist. The stone faded. Reality trembled. He could feel it unraveling, feel himself unraveling. He was being pushed out of the here into some other place where nothing existed at all. Kalendor blazed in his hands like the sun till he thought it would melt. He thought he himself would melt from the surge of the one power through him, the flood that he somehow directed into sealing up the hole that had opened around him, into holding himself on the side of existence. The stone became solid again. He could not even begin to imagine what it was that he did. The one power raged inside him till he barely knew himself, till he barely was himself, till what was himself almost did not exist. His precarious stability teetered. To either side lay the endless fall, obliteration by the power that coursed through him into the sword. Only in the dance along the razor's sharp edge was there even an uncertain safety. Kalendor shone in his fist until it seemed he carried the sun. Dimly within him, fluttering like a candle flame in a storm, was the surety that holding Kalendor, he could do anything. Anything. Through endless corridors he ran, dancing along the razor, chasing the one who would slay him, the one he must slay. There could be no other end this time. This time one of them must die. That Baalzaman knew it as well was clear. Always he fled, always staying ahead of sight, so that only the sounds of his flight drew Rand on. But even fleeing, he turned this stone of Tyr that was not the stone of Tyr against Rand. Rand fought back with instinct and guesses and chance. Fought and ran down that knife edge in perfect balance with the power. The tool and weapon that would consume him utterly if he faltered. Water filled the halls from top to bottom, thick and black as the bottom of the sea, choking off breath. He made it air again, unknowingly, and ran on. And suddenly the air gained weight until it seemed every inch of his skin supported a mountain, squeezing in from all directions. In the instant before he was crushed to nothingness, he chose tides out of the flood of power raging through him. He did not know how, or which, or why. It was too fast for thought or knowing, and the pressure vanished. He pursued Baalzamon, and the very air was abruptly solid rock encasing him, then molten stone, then nothing at all to fill his lungs. The ground beneath his boots pulled at him, as if every pound suddenly weighed 1,000. Then all weight vanished, so that a step left him spinning in midair. Unseen maws gaped to rip his mind from his body, to tear away his soul. He sprang each trap and ran on. What Baalzamon twisted to destroy him, he made right without being aware of how. Vaguely he knew that in some way, he had brought things back into natural balance, forced them into line with his own dance down that impossibly thin divide between existence and nothingness. But that knowledge was distant. All his awareness lay in the pursuit, the hunt, the death that must end it. And then he was in the heart of stone again, stalking through the rubbled gap that had been a wall. Some of the columns hung like broken teeth now, and Baalzamon backed away from him, eyes burning, shadow cloaking him. Black lines like steel wires seemed to run off from Baalzamon into the darkness bounding around him, vanishing into unimaginable heights and distances within that blackness. "I will not be undone!" Baalzamon cried. His mouth was fire, his shriek echoed among the columns. "I cannot be defeated! Aid me!" Some of the darkness shrouding him drifted into his hands, formed into a ball so black it seemed to soak up even the light of Kalendor. Sudden triumph blazed in the flames of his eyes. "You are destroyed!" Rand shouted. Kalendor spun in his hands. Its light roiled the darkness, severed the steel-black lines around Baalzamon, and Baalzamon convulsed. As if there were two of him, he seemed to dwindle and grow larger at the same time. "You are undone!" Rand plunged the shining blade into Baalzamon's chest. Baalzamon screamed, and the fires of his face flared wildly. "Fool!" he howled. "The great Lord of the Dark can never be defeated!" Rand pulled Kalendor's blade free as Baalzamon's body sagged and began to fall, the shadow around him vanishing. And suddenly Rand was in another heart of the stone, surrounded by columns still whole, and fighting men screaming and dying, veiled men and men in breastplates and helmets. Moraine still lay crumpled at the base of a red stone column, and at Rand's feet lay the body of a man sprawled on its back with a hole burned through the chest. He might have been a handsome man in his middle years, except that where his eyes and mouth should have been were only pits from which rose tendrils of black smoke. "I have done it," he thought. "I have killed Baalzamon, killed Shaitan. I have won the last battle. Light. I am the Dragon Reborn, the breaker of nations, the breaker of the world. No, I will end the breaking, end the killing. I will make it end." He raised Kalendor above his head. Silver lightning crackled from the blade, jagged streaks arching toward the great dome above. "Stop!" he shouted. The fighting ceased. Men stared at him in wonder, over black veils from beneath the rims of round helmets. "I am Randall Thor," he called, so his voice rang through the chamber. "I am the Dragon Reborn." Kalendor shone in his grasp. One by one, veiled men and helmeted, they knelt to him, crying, "The dragon is reborn! The dragon is reborn!" Chapter 56, the last chapter. People of the Dragon. Throughout the city of Tyr, people woke with the dawn, speaking of the dreams they had had. Dreams of the dragon battling Baalzamon in the heart of the stone. And when their eyes rose to the great fortress of the stone, they beheld the banner waving from its greatest height. Across a field of white flowed a sinuous form like a great serpent, scaled in scarlet and gold, but with a golden lion's mane and 4 legs, each tipped with 5 golden claws. Men came, stunned and frightened from the stone, to speak in hushed tones of what had happened in the night. And men and women thronged the streets, weeping as they shouted the fulfillment of prophecy. "The dragon!" they shouted. "All Thor! The dragon! All Thor!" Peering through an arrow slit high on the side of the stone, Matt shook his head as he listened to the chorus rising out of the city in waves. Well, maybe he is. He was still having a hard enough time coming to grips with Rand really being there. Everyone in the stone seemed to agree with the people below, or if they did not, they were not letting on. He had seen Rand just once since the night before, striding along a hall with Kalendar in his hand, surrounded by a dozen veiled Aiel and trailing a cloud of tyrants, a knot of defenders of the stone, and most of the few surviving High Lords. The High Lords, at least, seemed to think Rand would need them to help him rule the world. The Aiel kept everyone back with sharp looks, though, and spears if need be. They surely believed Rand was the dragon, though they called him He Who Comes with the Dawn. There were nearly 200 Aiel in the stone. They had lost a third of their numbers in the fight, but they had killed or captured 10 times as many defenders. As he turned from the arrow slit, his eyes brushed across Ruark. There was a tall stand at one end of the room, carved and polished upright wheels of some pale, dark-stripped wood with shelves slung between them so all of the shelves would stay flat as the wheels were revolved. Each shelf held a large book bound in gold, covers set with sparkling gems. The Aiel had one of the books open and was reading. Some sort of essays, Matt thought. Who would have thought an Aiel would read books? Who would have thought an Aiel could bloody read? Ruark glanced in his direction, all cold blue eyes and level stare. Matt looked away hastily before the Aiel could read his thoughts on his face. At least he is not veiled, thank the light. Burned me that Avienda nearly took my head off when I asked her if she could do any dances without spears. Bane and Chiad presented another problem. They were certainly pretty and more than friendly, but he could not manage to talk to the one without the other. The male Aiel seemed to think his efforts to get one of them alone were funny, and for that matter, so did Bane and Chiad. Women are odd, but Aiel women make odd seem normal. The great table in the middle of the room, carved and gilded on edges and thick legs, had been meant for gatherings of the High Lords. Moraine sat in one of the throne-like chairs, with the crescent banner of Tyr worked into its towering back in gilt and polished carnelian and pearl shell. Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine sat close by her. I still cannot believe Perrin is here in Tyr, Nynaeve was saying. Are you sure he is all right? Matt shook his head. He would have expected Perrin to have been up in the stone last night. The blacksmith had always been braver than anyone with good sense. He was well when I left him. Moraine's voice was serene. Whether he still is, I do not know. His companion is in some considerable danger, and he may have put himself into it also. His companion? Egwene said sharply. What? Who is Perrin's companion? What sort of danger? Nynaeve demanded. Nothing that need concern you, the Aes Sedai said calmly. I will go and see to her as I may shortly. I have delayed only to show you this, which I found among the Tirangrial and other things of the power the High Lords collected over the years. She took something from her pouch and laid it on the table before her. It was a disc the size of a man's hand, seemingly made of 2 teardrops fitted together, one black as pitch, the other white as snow. Matt seemed to remember seeing others like it. Ancient, like this one, but broken, where this was whole. 3 of them he had seen, not all together, but all in pieces. That could not be. He remembered that they were made of Quendia, unbreakable by any power, even the One Power. One of the 7 seals Lews Therin Kinslayer and the 100 companions put on the Dark One's prison when they resealed it, Elaine said, nodding as if confirming her own memory. More precisely, Moraine told her, a focus point for one of the seals. But in essence, you are correct. During the breaking of the world, they were scattered and hidden for safety. Since the Trolloc Wars, they have been lost in truth. She sniffed. I begin to sound like Baron. Egwene shook her head. I suppose I should have expected to find that here. Twice before Rand faced Baalzaman, and both times at least one of the seals was present. And this time unbroken, Nynaeve said. For the first time, the seal is unbroken. As if that mattered now. You think it does not? Lorraine's voice was dangerous in its quiet, and the other women frowned at her. Matt rolled his eyes. They kept talking about unimportant things. He did not much like standing not 20 feet from that disc now that he knew what it was, no matter the value of Gwendia, but... Your pardon, he said. They all turned to stare at him as if he were interrupting something important. Burn me. Break them out of a prison cell, save their lives half a dozen times between them before the night is done, and they glower as hard as the bloody Aes Sedai. Well, they did not thank me then either, did they? You'd have thought I was sticking my nose in where it wasn't wanted then, too, instead of keeping some bloody defender from putting a sword through one of them. Aloud, he said mildly. You do not mind if I ask a question, do you? You have all been talking this, Aes Sedai business, and no one has bothered to tell me anything. Matt, Nynaeve said warningly, tugging her braid, but Moraine said, in a calm only just touched with impatience, what is it that you wish to know? I want to know how all of this can be. He meant to keep his tone soft, but despite himself, he picked up intensity as he went along. The Stone of Tyr has fallen. The prophecy said that would never happen till the people of the dragon came. Does that mean we are the people of the dragon? You, me, Lan, and a few hundred bloody Aiel? He had seen the water during the night. There had not seemed to be much edge between Lan and the Aiel as to who was the more deadly. As Ruark straightened to stare at him, he hastily added, sorry, Ruark. Slip of the tongue. Perhaps, Moraine said slowly. I came to stop Bilal from killing Rand. I did not expect to see the Stone of Tyr fall. Perhaps we are. Prophecies are fulfilled as they are meant to be, not as we think they should be. Bilal. Matt shivered. He had heard that name last night, and he did not like it any more in daylight. If he had known one of the Forsaken was loose and inside the stone, he would never have gone near the place. He glanced at Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine. Well, I'd have come in like a bloody mouse anyway, not thumping people left and right. Sandor had gone scurrying out of the stone at daybreak to take the news to Mother Gwenna, he claimed. But Matt thought it was just to escape those stares from the three women, who looked as if they had not yet quite decided what to do about him. Ruark cleared his throat. When a man wishes to become a clan chief, he must go to Raidian, in the lands of the Genaiel, the clan that is not. He spoke slowly and frowned often at the red-fringed silk carpet under his soft boots. A man trying to explain what he did not want to explain at all. Women who wish to become wise ones also make this journey. But their marking, if they are marked, is kept secret among themselves. The men who are chosen at Raidian, those who survive, return marked on the left arm, so. He pushed back the sleeves of his coat and shirt together to reveal his left forearm, the skin much paler than that of his hands and face. Etched into the skin, as if part of it, wrapped twice around, marched the same gold and scarlet form as rippled on the banner above the stone. The Aiel let his sleeve fall with a sigh. It is a name not spoken except among the clan chiefs and the wise ones. We are... He cleared his throat again, unable to say it here. The Aiel are the people of the dragon, Moraine spoke quietly, but she sounded as close to startlement as Matt could remember ever hearing her. That I did not know. Then it really is all done, Matt said, just as the prophecy said. We can all go on our way with no more worries. The Amelin won't need me to blow that bloody horn now. How can you say that? Egwene demanded. Don't you understand the Forsaken are loose? Not to mention the Black Aja, Nynaeve added grimly. We took only Amiko and Joya here. 11 escaped. And I would like to know how. And the light alone knows how many others there are we do not know. Yes, Egwene said in a tone just as hard. I may not be up to facing one of the Forsaken, but I mean to take pieces out of Leandrin's hide. Of course, Matt said smoothly. Of course. Are they crazy? They want to chase after the Black Aja and the Forsaken? I only meant the hardest part is done. The stone has fallen to the people of the dragon, Rand has Kalendor, and Shaitan is dead. Moraine's stare was so hard that he thought the stone shook for a moment. Be quiet, you fool, the Aes Sedai said in a voice like a knife. Do you want to call his attention to you, naming the Dark One? But he's dead, Matt protested. Rand killed him. I saw the body. And a fine stink that was, too. I never thought anything could rot that fast. You saw the body, Moraine said with a twist to her mouth. A man's body. Not the Dark One, Matt. He looked at Egwene and the other two women. They appeared as confused as he. Rourke looked to be thinking of a battle he had thought was won and now learned had not even been fought. Then who was it? Matt demanded. Moraine, my memory has holes big enough for a wagon and team, but I remember Baalzamon being in my dreams. I remember. Burn me, I do not see how I can ever forget. And I recognize what was left of that face. You recognize Baalzamon, Moraine said. Or rather, the man who called himself Baalzamon. The Dark One yet lives, imprisoned at Shale Ghul, and the shadow yet lies across the pattern. The light illumine and protect us, Elaine muttered in a faint voice. I thought the Forsaken were the worst we had to worry about now. Are you sure, Moraine? Nynaeve said. Rand was certain, is certain, that he killed the Dark One. You seem to be saying Baalzamon was not the Dark One at all. I don't understand. How can you be so sure? And if he was not the Dark One, who was he? I can be sure for the simplest of reasons, Nynaeve. However fast decay took it, that was a man's body. Can you believe that if the Dark One were killed, you would leave a human body? The man Rand killed was a man. Perhaps he was the first of the Forsaken freed, or perhaps he was never entirely bound. We may never know which. I may know who he was. Egwene paused with an uncertain frown. At least, I may have a clue. Varen showed me a page from an old book that mentioned Baalzamon and Ishamael together. It was almost high chant and very nearly incomprehensible. But I remember something about a name hidden behind a name. Maybe Baalzamon was Ishamael. Perhaps, Moraine said. Perhaps it was Ishamael. But if it was, at least 9 of the 13 still live. Lanfear and Samael and Rahim and Pa. Even knowing that some of those 9 are at least free is not the most important thing. She laid a hand atop the disc on the table. 3 of the seals are broken. Only 4 still hold. Only those 4 seals stand between the Dark One and the world. And it may be that even with those holes, we can fight the world after a fashion. Whatever battle we won here, battle or skirmish, it is far from the last. Matt watched their faces firm, Egwene's and Nynaeve's and Elaine's. Slowly, reluctantly, but determinedly too, and shook his head. Bloody women! They're all ready to go on with this. Go on chasing the Black Adja, trying to fight the Forsaken and the bloody Dark One. Well, they needn't think I'm going to come pull them out of the soup pot again. They just needn't think it, that's all. One of the tall, paired doors pushed open while he was trying to think of something to say, and a tall young woman of regal bearing entered the room, wearing a coronet with a golden hawk in flight above her brows. Her black hair swept to pale shoulders, and her dress of the finest red silk left those shoulders bare, along with a considerable expanse of what Matt noted as an admirable bosom. For a moment she studied Ruark interestedly with large, dark eyes. Then she turned them on the women at the table, coolly imperious. Matt she appeared to ignore completely. I am not used to being given messages to carry, she announced, flourishing a folded parchment in one slim hand.
Sure.
And who are you, child? Moraine asked. The young woman drew herself up even more, which Matt would have thought was impossible. I am Berlin, first of Maine. She tossed the parchment down on the table in front of Moraine with a haughty gesture. A moment, child, Moraine said, unfolding the parchment. Who gave this to you? And why do you bring it if you are so unused to carrying messages? I Do not know. Marilyn stood facing the door. She sounded puzzled. She was impressive. She gave herself a shake and seemed to recover her opinion of herself. For a moment, she studied Ruark with a small smile. You are the leader of these Aielmen. Your fighting disturbed my sleep. Perhaps I will ask you to dine with me one day quite soon. She looked over her shoulder at Moraine. I am told the Dragon Reborn has taken the stone. Inform the Lord Dragon that the first of Mayenne will dine with him tonight. And she marched out of the room. Matt could think of no other way to describe that stately one-woman procession. I would like to have her in the tower as novice. Egwene and Elaine said it, almost like echoes, then shared a tight smile. Listen to this, Moraine said. Lews Therin was mine, he is mine, and he will be mine forever. I give him into your charge to keep for me until I come. It is signed, Lanfear. The Aes Sedai turned that cool gaze on Matt. And you thought it was done. You are Taviran, Matt, a thread more crucial to the pattern than most, and the sounder of the Horn of Elir. Nothing is done for you yet. They were all looking at him. Nynaeve sadly, Egwene as though she had never seen him before, Elaine as if she expected him to change into someone else. Ruark had a certain respect in his eyes, though Matt would just as soon have done without it, all things considered. Well, of course, he told her. Burn me. I understand. I wonder how soon Tom will be fit to travel. Time to run. Maybe Perrin will come with us. You can count on me. From outside, the cries still rose unceasing. The dragon, Althor. The dragon, Althor. The dragon, Althor. The dragon. And it was written that no hand but his should wield the sword held in the stone. But he did draw it out like fire in his hand, and his glory did burn the world. Thus did it begin. Thus do we sing his rebirth. Thus do we sing the beginning. From Doan Toldarate, Songs of the Last Age, Quarto 9, The Legend of the Dragon. Composed by Boann, songmistress at Tarlon, the Fourth Age. The end of the third book of the Wheel of Time.
Hi, this is Laura Wilson of Audio Renaissance, and I'm speaking with Robert Jordan.
All right, everyone. You're caught into this life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who continues to stop by. I definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe out there.